Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell stood at the paddock fence, watching as Valor grazed peacefully in the morning light. The magnificent chestnut thoroughbred had been with her through the darkest times of her life, and now, as she contemplated the invitation in her hand, she wondered if he could help her face the world again. The letter from the Memorial Day Parade Committee lay unfolded in her palm, the words both an honor and a burden. Distinguished combat veteran, special guest, represent female veterans. The words blurred as her hands trembled slightly. 3 years had passed since her medical discharge from the Army. 3 years of rebuilding her life and learning to live with both visible and invisible scars. Her right leg, now a sophisticated prosthetic below the knee, ached with phantom pain as rain clouds gathered on the horizon. 20 years of service, 4 deployments, and a silver star that she kept in a drawer rather than display it. Now they wanted her to ride in the town's parade, to be seen, to be scrutinized. "What do you think, boy?" she asked, as Valor lifted his head, ears pricked forward. His intelligent eyes seemed to see right through her hesitation. "Think we can handle a parade?" Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was her brother, Mike, calling for the 3rd time that morning. With a sigh, she answered, "I'm still thinking about it." "They need an answer by tomorrow, Sarah," Mike said, his voice softened by concern. "It would be good for you to get out there again. The whole town would be proud to see you." "The whole town doesn't know me anymore," she replied, watching as Valor returned to grazing. "They know the high school track star who enlisted after 9/11. They don't know this version of me." She didn't need to elaborate. Mike had been there through the surgeries, the nightmares, the days when getting out of bed seemed an insurmountable challenge. "This version of you is a hero, whether you accept that or not," Mike said firmly. And Valor could use the exercise. That horse was born to be seen. Sarah couldn't help but smile at that. Valor had been a cavalry demonstration horse before being retired to the therapy program where she'd met him. Even at 15, he carried himself with military precision and had an undeniable presence. He'd been donated to her equine therapy program 2 years ago, and their connection had been immediate. 6 months later, when she'd had enough savings, she'd adopted him permanently. "I'll think about it," she promised before ending the call. The farm where she lived and worked, Healing Hooves, sat on 20 acres outside of Millfield, the small Midwestern town where she'd grown up. After her injury and subsequent retirement from military service, she'd returned here to recover and eventually found purpose again working with the therapeutic riding program. Now she helped veterans like herself and children with disabilities find healing through horsemanship. It was fulfilling work, but it allowed her to stay in the background, guiding others while remaining safely anonymous. The parade would change that. There would be no hiding behind the scenes if she was literally on display, riding down Main Street with everyone watching. The thought made her stomach clench. Sarah pushed herself away from the fence and walked back to the small cabin she called home. Her limp was barely noticeable unless she was tired or the weather was changing. Inside, she glanced at the uniform hanging in her closet. She hadn't worn it since her discharge ceremony. Would it even fit properly now? And more importantly, did she have the courage to put it on again? Her silver star and purple heart remained in their cases, tucked away in her dresser drawer. Valor was the only medal she displayed openly. Not a medal of metal and ribbon, but one of flesh and blood and heart. He had saved her in ways no human could, carrying her spirit when her body and mind were too broken to move forward. Later that afternoon, Sarah led Valor to the round pen for their daily workout. As she sent him trotting around the perimeter, her mind returned to the parade invitation. Memorial Day was only 3 weeks away. If she was going to participate, she'd need to prepare both herself and Valor for the crowds, the noise, and the attention. "Whoa!" she called, and Valor immediately halted, turning to face her. His responsiveness had always amazed her. Sometimes she thought he could read her mind, anticipating her commands before she gave them. She approached him, running her hand along his muscular neck. "What if we mess up in front of everyone?" she whispered. "What if I can't handle it? What if you get spooked?" Valor nuzzled her shoulder, as if to say her concerns were unfounded. Sarah laughed despite herself. Easy for you to say. You've done this before. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the farm, Sarah's phone rang again. This time, it was Diane Henderson, the head of the parade committee and her former high school English teacher. "I'm not calling to pressure you," Diane began, though they both knew that wasn't entirely true. "But the committee is finalizing the lineup tomorrow, and we'd be so honored to have you participate." Sarah sighed, watching as Valor grazed peacefully nearby. "I'm not sure I'm what people are expecting, Diane. I'm not the same person who left Millfield." "Of course you're not," Diane said gently. "None of us are who we were 20 years ago. But this town is proud of you, Sarah. The children in our schools learn about your service. You're part of Millfield's history now." The weight of those words settled on Sarah's shoulders. History. Was that all she was now? A story told to school children about sacrifice and duty? "I'll think about it," she repeated, the same answer she'd given her brother. After hanging up, Sarah returned to the barn to settle Valor for the night. As she brushed his gleaming coat, she found herself speaking aloud, working through her thoughts. "They want Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell, the war hero," she told him as she ran the brush along his back. "But that's not really who I am anymore, is it? I'm just Sarah now. Sarah with the farm and the therapy program and the leg that aches when it rains." Valor turned his head to look at her, his large brown eyes reflecting the dim light of the barn. "But maybe," she continued, her hand pausing mid-stroke, "maybe I need to reconcile those two parts of myself, the soldier I was and the civilian I'm trying to be." That night, as rain pattered against her bedroom window, Sarah pulled out the photo albums she rarely opened. Pictures of her in uniform, standing with her unit in Afghanistan and Iraq. Images of a younger, whole woman with determined eyes and a confident stance. She barely recognized herself. There were newer photos, too. Ones taken at Healing Hooves, showing her with Valor and the veterans and children she worked with. In these, her smile seemed more genuine, if more weathered. These pictures told the story of her recovery, her reinvention. As she closed the album, her eyes fell on the parade invitation on her nightstand. Perhaps it was time to bridge her two worlds, to be seen as she was now, changed but undefeated. Maybe it was time to ride proud again, not as the unblemished hero people might expect, but as the scarred survivor she had become. With newfound resolution, Sarah reached for her phone and composed a text to Diane. "Valor and I accept your invitation. Please let me know what we need to do to prepare." As she pressed send, she felt a curious mixture of terror and relief. There would be no hiding now. In 3 weeks, she would face her hometown, not as the idealized hero they might be expecting, but as the complex, wounded, healing human being she had become. And Valor would be with her every step of the way. The morning after sending her acceptance, Sarah awoke with a start, her heart pounding. The familiar nightmare had visited again, explosions, screaming, the sickening moment when her world had erupted into chaos and pain. She sat up, breathing deeply, grounding herself in the present. Outside her window, dawn was breaking over the rolling pastures of Healing Hooves. This was her reality now, not the dust and danger of a war zone. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, attaching her prosthetic with practiced movements. 3 years, and it still felt foreign sometimes, this piece of technology that had replaced flesh and bone. She stood, testing her weight, and made her way to the kitchen to start coffee. Today would be busy. She had therapy sessions scheduled with 2 veterans in the morning and a group of children with special needs in the afternoon. As the coffee brewed, Sarah found herself thinking about how she had first met Valor. It had been during her own equine therapy sessions at a VA hospital program in Kentucky. She'd been resistant at first, skeptical that spending time with horses could help heal the wounds that surgeons and psychiatrists couldn't fully address. She had gone only because her physical therapist had insisted it might help with her balance and core strength as she adapted to the prosthetic. The first day, she had stood at the edge of the round pen, watching other veterans work with the therapy horses. Her anger and grief had been a tangible force, radiating from her in waves that seemed to make the other participants give her a wide berth. Then the program director had approached with Valor. "This is Valor," the woman had said. He was a cavalry demonstration horse at Fort Campbell, served for 10 years before retiring here. Sarah had looked into the horse's intelligent eyes and seen something she recognized, a certain wariness, a vigilance that comes from having seen too much. Later she learned that Valor had been through his own trauma, having survived a trailer accident that had killed another horse. He'd been skittish and unpredictable for months afterward, deemed unsuitable for his ceremonial duties. "He understands," the director had told her. "Sometimes that's what we need most. Someone who understands without words." That day, Sarah had only managed to stand near Valor, allowing him to sniff her hand, accepting his gentle curiosity without pushing for more. But each session had brought them closer, until she found herself looking forward to their time together more than anything else in her shattered life. The day she had first mounted him had been transformative. Seated on his broad back, she had felt whole again, powerful in a way she hadn't since before the explosion. Valor carried her with such care, responding to the slightest cue, that for those moments, her disability had vanished. They moved as one, and she had felt the first genuine joy since her injury. When she'd completed the therapy program and was preparing to return to Millfield, the program director had pulled her aside. "Valor seems to have chosen you," she'd said. "It happens sometimes. A special connection. Would you consider taking him with you? He's ready for a new chapter too." Sarah hadn't had the resources then, but she'd promised to stay in touch. When she'd established herself at Healing Hooves and had a little savings, she'd reached out. 2 months later, Valor had arrived at her farm, stepping off the trailer as if he'd always belonged there. Now, coffee in hand, Sarah walked to the barn to begin morning chores. Valor nickered softly as she approached his stall. She offered him a slice of apple, which he accepted with gentle lips. "We've got a big day ahead," she told him, "and an even bigger one coming in 3 weeks." After feeding the horses and turning them out to pasture, Sarah checked her phone to find a text from Diane with parade details. The committee was thrilled by her acceptance and wanted to give her a position of honor in the procession. They suggested she wear her uniform and decorations. Reading this, Sarah felt a flutter of anxiety. It had been so long since she'd worn her uniform. Would it feel like a costume now? Or would it still feel like a part of her? Her first therapy client of the day was Jensen, a Marine who had lost both legs in Syria. When he'd first come to Healing Hooves, he'd been bitter and closed off, much as she had been during her early recovery. Now, 6 months into the program, he was showing remarkable progress, not just physically, but emotionally. "I heard you're going to be in the Memorial Day parade," he said as they prepared his therapy horse, a gentle gelding named Scout. Sarah looked up, surprised. "News travels fast." Jensen shrugged. "Small town. People are excited. They're saying it's about time you got the recognition you deserve." She busied herself adjusting Scout's girth, avoiding Jensen's eyes. "I'm not doing it for recognition." "Then why are you doing it?" His directness was something she appreciated about him. Sarah paused, considering. "I'm still figuring that out. Maybe to prove something to myself. Maybe for all of us who came back different than when we left." Jensen nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Well, I'll be there cheering you on. Might even wear my uniform shirt. Show some Marine pride among all you Army folks." She smiled, grateful for his support. Throughout the day, as she worked with her clients, Sarah found her thoughts returning to the parade. Each person who mentioned it seemed genuinely pleased that she had agreed to participate. Their enthusiasm was touching, but it also increased the pressure she felt to represent her service and her fellow veterans with dignity. That evening, after her last session, Sarah decided to begin preparing Valor for the parade environment. Although he had been a demonstration horse, accustomed to crowds and noise, that had been years ago. She needed to ensure he would remain calm amid the chaos of bands playing, children shouting, and flags waving. She set up a makeshift obstacle course in the arena, with colorful streamers tied to posts, a small portable speaker playing march music, and various objects that might flutter or make noise. Leading Valor through the course, she watched his reactions carefully. His ears flicked toward each new sound, and he eyed the streamers warily, but he trusted her enough to follow where she led. After several passes through the obstacles, Sarah decided to add another element. She retrieved an American flag from her cabin and returned to the arena, unfurling it slowly to let Valor see and smell it. He sniffed it curiously but showed no sign of fear. Encouraged, she attached it to a pole and carried it while leading him through the course again. Valor walked calmly alongside her, occasionally glancing at the flag as it fluttered in the breeze. "Good boy," she praised, stroking his neck. "You've still got it." As the sun began to set, Sarah decided to try mounting with the flag in hand. This would be closer to the parade conditions, where she would need to manage both horse and flag while being observed by hundreds of spectators. She settled into the saddle, took up the reins in her left hand, and held the flag with her right. Valor stood perfectly still, waiting for her cue. "Forward," she said softly, applying gentle pressure with her legs. Valor moved off smoothly, his stride measured and even. They circled the arena at a walk, then a collected trot. The flag snapped in the wind, but Valor remained steady. Sarah felt a surge of pride in her horse and a growing confidence in their ability to handle the parade. As darkness fell, Sarah cooled Valor down and returned him to his stall with an extra measure of grain. "You earned it," she told him, running her hand along his powerful shoulder. "We might just pull this off after all." Back in her cabin, Sarah opened her closet and removed the garment bag containing her dress uniform. She laid it out on her bed, running her fingers over the fabric, the insignia, the rows of ribbons that told the story of her service. For the first time in 3 years, she allowed herself to feel a measure of pride as she looked at it, rather than the complex mix of grief, anger, and loss that had previously overwhelmed her. She would wear it again, not just for the town or for other veterans, but for herself, to reclaim this part of her identity that she had tried so hard to lock away. And Valor would be there with her, a living symbol of resilience and healing, carrying her forward just as he had done since the day they met. With new determination, Sarah picked up her phone and called Mike. "I need your help with something for the parade," she said when he answered. "It's time to do this right." Mike arrived at Healing Hooves early Saturday morning, his pickup truck loaded with supplies. The siblings had spent hours on the phone discussing Sarah's vision for her parade appearance, and Mike had enthusiastically taken on the role of helping her prepare. As a construction contractor, he had the tools and skills to build what she needed. "Morning, Lieutenant Colonel," he called as he parked beside the barn, reporting for duty. Sarah smiled at her brother's teasing formality. "At ease, civilian," she replied, walking over to help unload the truck. "Coffee's ready in the cabin." They worked through the morning, constructing a special mount that would attach to Sarah's saddle, designed to hold a larger American flag securely without requiring her to support its weight for the entire parade route. Mike had consulted with a local saddler to ensure it wouldn't interfere with her ability to control Valor or cause him any discomfort. "So you're really going through with this," Mike said as they took a break around noon. He studied his sister's face, noting the determination in her eyes that had been absent for too long. Mom and Dad would have been proud. Sarah nodded, thinking of their parents who had passed away before her final deployment. Their father from a heart attack 8 years ago. Their mother from cancer just months before Sarah was injured. Sometimes she was grateful they hadn't lived to see her struggle through recovery. "I'm not sure yet what I'm trying to prove," she admitted. "But it feels important, not just for me." "You don't need to prove anything," Mike said, his voice gentle but firm. "You've already done more than most people will in a lifetime." Sarah shrugged, uncomfortable with his praise. "Help me test this mount on Valor. I want to make sure he's comfortable with it before I add the flag." They spent the afternoon adjusting the custom bracket, making small modifications until it sat perfectly on the saddle. Valor stood patiently through the process, occasionally turning his head to watch their work with curious eyes. When they finally had it positioned correctly, Sarah mounted and walked Valor around the arena to ensure it didn't affect his movement or her ability to ride. "Seems solid," Mike called as they passed him. "Want to try it with the flag now?" Sarah nodded, and Mike carefully attached the flag to the mount. It was larger than the one she had used for initial training, a proper parade flag that would make a striking visual statement. As it unfurled in the breeze, Valor's ears pricked forward, but he maintained his steady pace. "That's my boy," Sarah murmured, patting his neck. They completed several circuits of the arena at different gates, and Valor performed flawlessly each time. The flag mount worked exactly as designed, allowing the colors to fly proudly while leaving Sarah's hands free to handle the reins. As they finished the test, Sarah noticed a car pulling into the farm driveway. It was Diane Henderson, along with 2 other members of the parade committee. Sarah dismounted, handing Valor's reins to Mike, and walked over to greet them. "We hope you don't mind us dropping by," Diane said, her eyes widening as she took in the sight of Sarah in riding clothes with Valor standing majestically behind her. "We wanted to discuss your position in the parade lineup and, oh my, is that your horse? He's magnificent." Sarah felt a surge of pride at the admiration in Diane's voice. "This is Valor. He was a cavalry demonstration horse before retiring to the therapy program where I met him." The committee members approached cautiously, admiring Valor's impressive stature and gleaming coat. The horse stood tall, almost posing, seeming to understand he was being appreciated. "We were thinking of placing you near the front of the parade," one of the committee members, a man named Robert, explained. "Right after the color guard and before the high school band. You'd be our featured veteran this year." Sarah hesitated. Being so prominently featured meant even more attention, more eyes watching her every move. But wasn't that part of why she had agreed to do this, to be visible, to represent female veterans and those who came home with injuries both visible and invisible? "That sounds appropriate," she finally said. "Valor is used to bands and noise from his demonstration days, so following the color guard shouldn't be a problem." Diane beamed. "Wonderful. Now, about your introduction. We usually have the announcer read a brief bio as our featured veterans pass the main reviewing stand. Is there anything specific you'd like included or omitted?" This was something Sarah hadn't considered. What did she want people to know about her service? About her life now? She thought carefully before responding. "Keep it simple, please. My rank, branches served, major deployments. You can mention the Silver Star and Purple Heart, but I'd appreciate if you'd also highlight my work with Healing Hooves. This isn't just about my military service. It's about the journey afterward, too." Diane nodded, making notes on her tablet. "Of course. And will you be comfortable with local press coverage? The Tribune always covers the parade, and this year they're doing a special feature on veterans in our community." Sarah felt a knot form in her stomach. Press coverage meant photos, possibly interviews, more exposure than she had anticipated. She glanced at Mike, who gave her an encouraging nod. "I'd prefer no interviews before the parade," she said firmly. "If they want to speak with me afterward, I'll consider it. But my focus that day needs to be on Valor and completing the route safely." "Absolutely," Diane assured her. "We'll make sure they understand those boundaries." After the committee members left, Sarah led Valor back to his stall and began removing the tack. Mike leaned against the stall door, watching her methodical movements. "You know people are going to have opinions," he said quietly. "Some will see exactly what they want to see. The hometown hero returned. Others might not understand why you've kept to yourself these past few years." Sarah nodded, not looking up from her task. "I know. That's part of what scares me about this whole thing. I'm not the person they remember, and I'm not some perfect symbol of patriotic sacrifice either. I'm just trying to figure out how to live with everything that's happened." "Then show them that," Mike suggested. "The real story isn't about perfect heroes. It's about real people who chose to serve and are still figuring out what comes after." His words stayed with Sarah long after he'd left for the day. As she completed her evening chores, she contemplated what it would mean to present herself authentically to her hometown, not as the untarnished hero they might expect, but as the complex, still healing person she had become. The next morning, Sarah received a call from Colonel Richardson, her former commanding officer, who had heard about her parade participation through the veterans' grapevine. "Mitchell, good to hear you're getting back out there," he said, his familiar gruff voice bringing back a flood of memories. "Thought you might be interested to know that some of the unit will be there to support you." Sarah nearly dropped the phone. "Sir? Who from the unit?" "Johnson's driving up from Fort Knox. Martinez is on leave and wants to come. Brooks and Sanchez too. They're proud of you, Mitchell. We all are." Sarah's throat tightened with emotion. These were members of her last command, soldiers who had served under her leadership. They had visited her in the hospital after her injury, but as her recovery progressed, she had gradually distanced herself, unable to face their concern without feeling like a failure. "I don't know what to say, sir," she managed. "You don't need to say anything. Just ride tall. Show the world what we already know, that you're one hell of a soldier and an even better leader." After ending the call, Sarah walked to Valor's paddock in a daze. The horse trotted over as she approached, sensing her emotional state with that uncanny awareness he had always possessed. She leaned against his solid warmth, breathing in his familiar scent. "The stakes just got higher, boy," she whispered. "Now we're not just riding for me or for the town, we're riding for them too." Over the next few days, Sarah intensified their preparation. She worked with Valor on standing completely still for extended periods, knowing there might be delays during the parade. She played recordings of marching bands at increasing volumes, familiarizing him with the sounds they would encounter. She even enlisted some of the teenage volunteers from the therapy program to wave flags, shout, and create the kind of excited commotion they might face along the parade route. Valor handled it all with remarkable composure. If anything, he seemed to be enjoying the extra attention and the more challenging work. Sarah realized that, like her, he had been designed for more demanding tasks than their quiet daily routine at the farm. He had been trained to perform, to carry himself with pride in public settings, and those instincts were resurfacing with each practice session. Word about Sarah's participation in the parade spread quickly through Millfield. She noticed it when she went into town for supplies. The way people would glance at her with newfound interest, sometimes approaching to express their support, other times hanging back as if unsure how to interact with her. It was unsettling after years of relative anonymity, but she forced herself to respond with polite thanks rather than retreat from the attention. One afternoon, as she was loading feed into her truck at the farm supply store, she overheard two men talking nearby. "That's her, the woman veteran who's going to be in the parade," one said in a poorly hushed voice. "Doesn't look like much," the other replied with a slight scoff. "I thought she was some kind of war hero." Sarah froze, the heavy bag of grain suspended halfway into the truck bed. Before she could decide whether to respond or ignore them, the store manager approached the men. "That war hero lost her leg saving her entire unit from an IED, he said coldly. "Show some respect, or shop elsewhere." The men fell silent, and Sarah quickly finished loading her supplies, keeping her head down. As she closed the tailgate, the manager walked over. "I apologize for that, Colonel," he said quietly. "Some people don't think before they speak." "It's fine," Sarah replied automatically, though her heart was racing. "And it's just Sarah now." The manager shook his head. "My son served in the Marines. I know what you all sacrifice. What you're doing in this parade. It matters. Don't let ignorant comments make you think otherwise." As she drove back to the farm, Sarah realized this incident was likely just the first of many. The parade would put her in the public eye, subject to the judgments and expectations of people who couldn't possibly understand her experience. Was she ready for that level of scrutiny? The question haunted her as she unloaded the supplies, as she worked with her therapy clients, as she lay awake that night staring at the ceiling. But when morning came, and she walked out to find Valor waiting at the fence, his ears pricked forward in greeting. Her resolve returned. They would do this together, just as they had faced every challenge since finding each other. And whatever came afterward, they would face that too, one step at a time. 2 weeks before the parade, Sarah decided it was time to try on her uniform. She had been avoiding this moment, uncertain how it would feel to don the attire that had defined her for so many years. She closed the blinds in her bedroom, creating a private space for this personal milestone, and carefully removed the dress uniform from its protective garment bag. The fabric felt both familiar and foreign in her hands as she laid out each piece on her bed. The blue jacket with its gold buttons gleamed in the soft light. The skirt, the white shirt, the tie. Each item carried memories of ceremonies, deployments, transitions. She ran her fingers over the rows of ribbons and medals, each one representing a chapter in her military career. Taking a deep breath, Sarah began to dress. She put on the shirt first, then the skirt, adjusting it to accommodate her prosthetic leg. The tie came next, her fingers remembering the precise movements needed to create a perfect knot. Finally, she slipped on the jacket, carefully fastening each button. When she was fully dressed, Sarah hesitated before turning to look in the full-length mirror on her closet door. What would she see? Would the uniform still feel like a part of her, or would it seem like a costume, a relic from a previous life? She steeled herself and turned to face her reflection. The woman who stared back was both familiar and strange. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell in her dress blues, standing tall despite everything. The uniform still fit, though perhaps a bit differently than before. Her body had changed after the injury and during recovery, but the tailoring was forgiving enough to accommodate these shifts. What struck her most was her own expression. There was a gravity in her eyes that hadn't been there in her earlier years of service, a depth born of pain and resilience. She looked like a soldier who had seen the worst of war and survived, not just physically, but spiritually. It was a face that told a true story, not a recruitment poster fantasy. Sarah took a step closer to the mirror, noting how the prosthetic leg was virtually indistinguishable beneath the skirt. She would wear low heels for the parade rather than the standard pumps, a practical adaptation that her former commanding officers would surely approve. Military life had always valued function alongside form. "Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell," she said softly to her reflection, testing how the title felt in her mouth after so long. It wasn't entirely comfortable, but it wasn't entirely wrong either. It was part of who she was, not the whole, but an essential piece. A knock at her door startled her from her contemplation. "Sarah, you in there?" It was Jensen, early for his therapy session. "Just a minute," she called, quickly unbuttoning her jacket. Then she paused, reconsidering. Perhaps it was time to let someone else see her this way, someone who would understand what it meant. She opened the door to find Jensen on her porch, his wheelchair positioned at the top of the ramp she had installed when she bought the property. His eyebrows rose in surprise at the sight of her in uniform. "Well, damn, Colonel," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Look at you." Sarah felt a flush of embarrassment, but forced herself to stand tall, accepting his appraisal. "Just making sure it still fits." Jensen nodded, his eyes reflecting understanding. "Feels weird, doesn't it? Like putting on someone else's skin." "Exactly," Sarah agreed, relieved that he got it. "I'm not sure if I'm honoring who I was or pretending to still be that person." "Maybe it's neither," Jensen suggested. "Maybe it's just acknowledging that part of your story." He gestured to his own legs, or the absence of them. "We don't get to erase chapters we've lived through, even when they change us completely." Sarah considered his words as they made their way to the barn together. There was wisdom in what he said. The uniform wasn't a disguise or a performance. It was simply a visual representation of a significant portion of her life, one that had shaped her profoundly and continued to influence who she was becoming. As they approached the paddock where Scout waited for Jensen's session, they found Mike already there, checking the mounting block and ramp he had built to allow wheelchair users to mount independently. "Whoa," Mike said, catching sight of Sarah in her uniform. "I wasn't prepared for how that would hit me." His voice carried a hint of the emotion he usually kept carefully controlled. "You look like Dad in his service photos." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. Their father had served in Vietnam, his own experiences shadowing their childhood in ways they hadn't fully understood until they were adults. His quiet pride when Sarah had graduated from West Point had been one of the most meaningful moments of her life. "I was thinking the same thing earlier," she admitted, wondering what he would think of all this. Mike's expression softened. "He'd be proud, Sarah. Not just of your service, but of what you're doing now, helping others heal through this place." He gestured to the farm around them. That would have meant everything to him. The rest of the day passed in a blur of therapy sessions and preparations. Sarah changed out of her uniform after her conversation with Mike and Jensen, but the experience of wearing it stayed with her. It had been a private ceremony of sorts, a reconciliation with a part of herself she had been holding at arm's length. That evening, Sarah received an email from the Millfield Tribune. Despite Diane's assurances, the local newspaper was requesting an interview before the parade. The reporter, Eliza Santos, wrote that she was particularly interested in featuring a female combat veteran during a time when women's roles in the military were still being debated in some circles. Sarah stared at the email for a long time, her cursor hovering over the delete button. Her instinct was to refuse, to protect her privacy and avoid potential misrepresentation, but something made her hesitate. Perhaps Jensen's words about not erasing chapters of one story, or perhaps the realization that her visibility might matter to others in ways she hadn't considered. After careful thought, she composed a reply. She declined the pre-parade interview, but offered instead to speak with Eliza afterward, suggesting they meet at Healing Hooves where she could also highlight the therapeutic riding program. It was a compromise that felt manageable, maintaining her focus on the parade itself while still opening a door to sharing her story on her own terms. The following day brought a new challenge. Sarah had scheduled a dress rehearsal of sorts, planning to ride Valor in full parade attire along the country roads near her farm. She wanted to test how both she and her horse would handle a longer route while fully outfitted. She dressed carefully in her uniform, attached her medals, and pulled her hair back into a neat bun at the nape of her neck. The morning was clear and mild, perfect riding weather. As she led Valor from the barn, already saddled with the special flag mount attached, she noticed how the horse seemed to stand taller, as if sensing the importance of the occasion. "You remember what this is all about, don't you?" she murmured as she mounted. Valor's ears flicked back to catch her words, then forward again, alert and ready. They set out down the long driveway of the farm, turning onto the quiet country road that led toward town. Sarah sat straight in the saddle, conscious of her posture in a way she hadn't been during their practice sessions. The weight of the uniform, both literal and symbolic, reminded her of the responsibility she had carried as an officer, the lives under her command, the decisions that could mean life or death. They had gone about a mile when a pickup truck approached from behind. Sarah guided Valor to the side of the road, maintaining a steady pace as the vehicle slowed alongside them. The driver, an older man Sarah recognized as a regular at the hardware store, stared at them with undisguised curiosity. "Morning," she called, keeping her tone neutral. The man nodded, seeming almost startled that she had addressed him. "Morning, ma'am. You practicing for the parade?" "Yes, sir. Just making sure we're ready." He continued to drive slowly beside them, his gaze moving from Sarah's uniform to the flag mount, to Valor's powerful stride. "My boy served in Iraq," he finally said. "Never came home." Sarah felt a pang in her chest. "I'm sorry for your loss, sir." The man was quiet for a moment, then said, "He would have liked seeing you in this parade. Thought female soldiers didn't get enough recognition." With that, he nodded once more, then accelerated gently and continued down the road. The brief encounter left Sarah with a complex mix of emotions. There was the familiar weight of survivor's guilt. Why had she come home when so many others hadn't? But there was also a new sense of purpose in what she was doing. Perhaps her participation in the parade could be a form of representation for all those who couldn't be there, including the son of the man in the pickup. Their practice route took them in a 4-mile loop that approximated the length of the parade. Valor maintained his dignified pace throughout, unperturbed by passing vehicles or the occasional barking dog. When they returned to the farm, Sarah felt a growing confidence in their ability to complete the actual parade route without incident. As she unsaddled Valor and began grooming him, she heard the crunch of tires on gravel. A moment later, Colonel Richardson appeared in the barn doorway, his tall frame silhouetted against the afternoon light. "Permission to enter, Colonel Mitchell?" he asked with a hint of a smile. Sarah straightened automatically, years of military protocol kicking in before she could check the response. "Permission granted, sir. This is a surprise." Richardson stepped into the barn, his gaze taking in the neat rows of stalls, the well-organized tack room visible through an open door, and finally settling on Valor. "Impressive operation you have here, Mitchell. And that's one hell of a horse." "Thank you, sir. Valor's the heart of this place." Richardson approached the stall slowly, allowing the horse to assess him before extending a hand for Valor to sniff. "I came early to see how you're doing. The others will be here for the parade, but I wanted to check in personally." Sarah appreciated his directness. Richardson had never been one for unnecessary small talk. "I'm doing better than I expected, sir. Having a specific mission helps." He nodded, understanding the military mindset that still shaped her thinking. "I also wanted to warn you about some chatter I've been hearing. Not everyone is supportive of the focus on female veterans. There's been some noise on local social media, questioning whether highlighting a woman takes away from male veterans' contributions." Sarah sighed, leaning against the stall door. "I was afraid of something like that." "What are they saying specifically?" "The usual garbage, that your position in the parade is political correctness, that women didn't see real combat." Richardson's disgust was evident in his tone. "I wanted you to be prepared in case any of these voices show up on the day." "I appreciate the heads up, sir, but I've faced worse than small-town critics." Richardson smiled grimly. "That you have, Mitchell. That you have." He watched as she continued grooming Valor, her movements methodical and soothing. "You know, when I visit other wounded warriors from our unit, I tell them about you, about this place you've built, the work you're doing. You're an example of resilience, whether you see yourself that way or not." Sarah didn't know how to respond to such direct praise, especially from a commanding officer she had always respected deeply. She focused on a tangle in Valor's mane, working it loose with careful fingers. "The parade is just one day," Richardson continued, "but what you're doing here," he gestured to the farm around them, "this is the real mission now. Don't lose sight of that, no matter what happens on Memorial Day." His words stayed with Sarah long after he had departed, promising to see her on parade day. As she completed her evening chores and settled Valor for the night, she reflected on the different perspectives being placed on her participation: the parade committee's desire for a hometown hero, the local paper's interest in featuring a female veteran, the potential critics who saw her inclusion as a political statement rather than a recognition of service. None of these external viewpoints captured her own complex feelings about the event. For Sarah, the parade had become a personal milestone, a step toward reintegrating the soldier she had been with the civilian she was becoming. Whether others understood that or not was beyond her control. All she could do was ride with dignity, honoring both her service and her ongoing journey of recovery. That night, as she polished her dress shoes and laid out her uniform for the final time before the parade, Sarah felt a growing sense of calm. Whatever happened on Memorial Day, she and Valor would face it together, just as they had faced every challenge since finding each other. The week before Memorial Day brought unexpected challenges. A spring storm swept through the region, dropping nearly 3 inches of rain in a single night and temporarily flooding parts of Sarah's property. The arena where she had been practicing with Valor became a muddy mess, and she had to relocate their training sessions to higher ground. Then, just 5 days before the parade, Valor developed a slight swelling in his left front leg. Sarah noticed it immediately during morning feeding. a subtle change in his gait as he moved across the paddock. Alarmed, she called the veterinarian, who arrived within hours to examine the horse. Probably just a mild strain, Dr. Reynolds concluded after a thorough check. Nothing serious, but he needs rest for the next couple of days. No riding until that swelling goes down completely. Sarah felt a wave of anxiety. The parade is on Monday. Will he be recovered by then? The vet considered this, gently palpating Valor's leg once more. If you follow my instructions exactly, probably yes. Cold hosing 3 times daily, a poultice overnight, and absolutely no weight-bearing exercise until Sunday at the earliest. Then we'll reassess. Sarah nodded, pushing aside her concerns to focus on Valor's care. His well-being had to come first, regardless of her plans for the parade. She established a treatment schedule, setting alarms on her phone to remind her when each cold hosing session was due, even if it meant interrupting her therapy sessions with clients. Mike called midweek to check on their preparations and was immediately concerned when she explained Valor's injury. "Should we have a backup plan?" he suggested. "Maybe you could ride in a Jeep instead if he's not recovered in time." "No," Sarah replied firmly. "It's Valor or nothing. This was always about both of us." She understood her brother's practical suggestion, but the thought of participating without Valor felt wrong. They were a team, their stories intertwined. If Valor couldn't be part of the parade, she would withdraw rather than proceed without him. By Saturday morning, the swelling had subsided significantly. Dr. Reynolds returned for a follow-up examination and was pleased with Valor's progress. "The cold hosing did its job," she said, watching as Valor walked easily across the paddock. "I think we can clear him for light exercise tomorrow, and if all goes well, he should be fine for the parade on Monday." Relief washed over Sarah. "Thank you for fitting us into your schedule on such short notice." The vet smiled, packing up her equipment. "Are you kidding? Half the town is talking about your parade appearance. I wouldn't have missed this for anything." This casual comment reminded Sarah yet again of how much attention her participation was generating. The pressure to represent her service, her fellow veterans, and now Valor's recovery added to the weight she already felt. She spent the rest of Saturday meticulously cleaning her tack and polishing every brass button on her uniform, finding calm in these precise, familiar tasks. Sunday dawned clear and warm, a perfect spring day. With Dr. Reynolds' approval, Sarah saddled Valor for a light workout, carefully monitoring his movements for any sign of discomfort. To her immense relief, he moved fluidly, showing no trace of the earlier swelling. They kept the session short, just enough to confirm that he was ready for the next day's event. That afternoon, Sarah received a text from Jensen. "The crew's meeting for breakfast at Millie's Diner before the parade. Aero 800. You're expected, Colonel." She smiled at his directive tone, so characteristic of military communication. The crew would be her former unit members and possibly other veterans from the area. The thought of seeing them all together, in civilian settings but bound by shared experiences, filled her with both anticipation and anxiety. As evening approached, Mike arrived with their parents' American flag, the one that had draped their father's casket at his military funeral. Sarah had asked if they could incorporate it somehow into her parade appearance, and Mike had carefully mounted it on a smaller pole that would attach alongside the larger parade flag on Valor's saddle. "I had it professionally cleaned and preserved," Mike explained, handling the folded triangle with reverence. "Are you sure about using it? We could lose it if something goes wrong." Sarah nodded, taking the flag from him. "I'm sure. Dad would want it to be part of this. And if something happens to it, at least it will be while it's being displayed proudly, not sitting in a box." They attached the special mount to the saddle, testing its stability and making final adjustments. When they were satisfied, Mike helped Sarah load everything into her truck for the morning. "What time should I pick you up?" he asked as they finished. Sarah hesitated. "Actually, I think I need to do this part on my own. Can you meet me at the staging area instead? I'll trailer Valor there myself." Mike studied her face, then nodded in understanding. "You got it. I'll be there by 8:30. After he left, Sarah sat on her porch as darkness fell, listening to the night sounds of the farm. The weight of tomorrow's events settled around her shoulders like a familiar rucksack. She had carried heavier burdens in her life, literal and figurative, but this one was different. It wasn't about survival or completing a mission. It was about reconciliation, with her past, with her hometown, with herself. Sleep came fitfully that night. Sarah drifted in and out of consciousness, her mind replaying moments from her military career, interspersed with imagined scenarios of what might occur at the parade. When her alarm finally sounded at 5 a.m., she rose with a sense of relief that the waiting was over. She moved through her morning routine with military precision. Shower, dress in the undergarments of her uniform, coffee, a light breakfast she barely tasted. By 6, she was at the barn, finding comfort in the familiar rhythms of caring for Valor. The horse seemed to sense the importance of the day, standing quietly as she groomed him with extra attention, making his chestnut coat gleam in the early morning light. Loading him into the trailer went smoothly, another good sign. Sarah changed into the remainder of her uniform in the small tack room, adjusting each element with care. The weight of the ribbons and medals on her chest felt substantial, a tangible reminder of everything she had experienced. Last came her cover, the dress hat with its polished insignia, which she placed carefully on her head, adjusting it to the precise angle required by regulations. The drive into town was surreal. Millfield was already stirring, with early risers setting up chairs along the parade route and volunteers placing flags on lampposts. Sarah kept her focus on the road, mentally reviewing the parade route and any potential challenges. Valor stood calmly in the trailer, occasionally shifting his weight but showing no signs of stress. She arrived at the staging area, the high school parking lot, just before 7:30. Already the space was filling with parade participants. The high school band warming up in one corner, veterans groups gathering near the entrance, floats being given final decorations. Sarah parked in the designated area for equestrian participants and sat for a moment, gathering her resolve before stepping out. As soon as she opened the truck door, she became aware of eyes turning in her direction. Conversations paused, and heads turned to watch the female officer in full dress uniform approach the horse trailer. Sarah straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and proceeded with the task at hand, unloading Valor with practiced efficiency. The horse stepped down from the trailer with dignity, his head high, taking in the unfamiliar surroundings with alert interest rather than fear. Sarah led him to a quiet area away from the main activity, where she could complete his preparation without too much disruption. She was adjusting Valor's bridle when a familiar voice called her name. Turning, she saw Jensen approaching in his wheelchair, dressed in his marine dress blues, his chest adorned with his own impressive array of medals. "Reporting as ordered, Colonel," he said with a grin, executing a seated salute. Sarah returned the salute, a smile breaking through her tense expression. "I thought you were meeting the others at the diner." "Change of plans. They're coming here instead. Wanted to see you and this famous horse before the parade starts." He wheeled closer, examining Valor with an appreciative eye. "He looks like he was born for this." "He was," Sarah replied, running a hand along Valor's gleaming neck. "I'm the one who needed convincing." Jensen's expression softened. "You both look ready now. The others should be here any minute." As if on cue, Sarah heard her name called again, this time in a chorus of voices. Turning, she saw a group approaching, and her heart leapt in recognition. There was Martinez with his distinctive swagger, Brooks with her camera already in hand, Sanchez with his booming laugh, and several others from her former unit. Behind them walked Colonel Richardson, impeccable in his own dress uniform. For a moment, Sarah couldn't move. Seeing them all together, outside the context of deployment or military facilities, was overwhelming. These were the people who had known her at her strongest and seen her at her most vulnerable. They had visited her in the hospital when she was still reeling from the injury that had ended her career. They had witnessed her struggle and her withdrawal, and yet here they were, showing up for her once again. Martinez reached her first, snapping a crisp salute before breaking into a wide grin. "Looking sharp, Colonel." One by one they greeted her, some with formal salutes, others with the easy familiarity of comrades who had shared meals and missions and midnight watches. Brooks took photos, capturing Valor's regal bearing and the reunion of the unit. Sanchez presented Sarah with a unit patch he had framed. "To carry with you today," he explained. Colonel Richardson approached last, surveying the scene with approval. "Your mount looks fit for duty, Mitchell," he said, admiring Valor. "Mind if I?" He gestured toward the horse. "Of course, sir," Sarah replied, guiding Valor closer. Richardson patted the horse's neck with genuine appreciation. "You chose well," he said quietly. "Or perhaps he chose you." "A little of both, I think," Sarah admitted. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the parade coordinator, a harried-looking woman with a clipboard and a walkie-talkie. "Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell, we're beginning lineup in 15 minutes. You'll be position 7, right after the color guard and the mayor's car. Do you need any assistance?" Sarah shook her head. "We're all set, thank you." As the coordinator hurried off to her next task, Sarah turned back to her former unit members. "Thank you all for coming. It means more than I can say." "Wouldn't miss it," Martinez replied, while the others nodded in agreement. "We'll be watching from the main viewing stand," Colonel Richardson added, "right where everyone can see us cheering for our favorite officer." The group dispersed, heading to their designated viewing areas, while Sarah returned to making final preparations. She attached both flags to Valor's saddle, the large parade flag that would be visible to all spectators and her father's smaller flag, positioned where she could see it while riding. Mike arrived as promised, helping her with the last details. He held Valor while Sarah mounted, ensuring that her uniform remained immaculate during the process. Once seated in the saddle, Sarah took a moment to center herself, adjusting her posture and checking that everything was in place. "You look like something out of a recruiting poster," Mike said, looking up at her with undisguised pride. "But better, because you're real." Sarah smiled at her brother's assessment. "Let's hope Valor behaves as regally as he looks." As if understanding the comment, Valor arched his neck slightly, assuming an even more impressive stance. Mike laughed. "I think he knows exactly what he's doing." The parade marshal began calling for participants to move into position. Sarah guided Valor toward their designated spot, weaving carefully through the growing crowd of parade participants. As they passed, conversations quieted, and people stepped aside, creating a path for the impressive horse and his uniformed rider. When they reached their position behind the color guard, Sarah felt a momentary flash of doubt. Was she ready for this level of visibility? For the scrutiny and judgment that would inevitably come? She glanced down at her father's flag, remembering his quiet strength, his belief in service above self. Then she looked ahead at the parade route, lined with her neighbors and former classmates, veterans and civilians, all gathered to commemorate those who had served and those who had fallen. This was no longer just about her personal journey. It was about representation, for female veterans, for wounded warriors, for all who served and returned changed by their experiences. Sarah straightened in the saddle, aligning her shoulders and lifting her chin. Valor stood perfectly still beneath her, a pillar of strength and dignity. The high school band began to play the national anthem, signaling that the parade was about to begin. As the final notes faded, the color guard stepped forward, and the procession was underway. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the rhythm of Valor's movement as he followed her cue to walk forward. Whatever awaited them along the parade route, they would face it together. Officer and mount, veteran and therapy horse, two souls who had found each other in the aftermath of trauma and forged a bond that had healed them both in ways neither could have anticipated. With the flags flying proudly above them, Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell and Valor moved forward into the sunlight, ready to be seen for who they truly were. The first 100 yards of the parade route passed in a blur of noise and color. Valor moved with measured steps, his hooves striking the pavement in a steady rhythm that Sarah found oddly comforting. The morning sun gleamed on his coat and on the brass buttons of her uniform. Behind them, the high school band played a patriotic march, the drum beats vibrating through the air. Sarah maintained perfect posture in the saddle, her years of military bearing evident in every line of her body. She kept her gaze forward, acknowledging the crowds on either side with occasional nods, but not seeking out individual faces. It was a technique she had used during formal military reviews: focus on the horizon, maintain composure, project confidence regardless of what churned beneath the surface. As they approached the first major intersection, Sarah became aware of the commentary being broadcast from speakers set up along the route. The parade announcer, a local radio personality, was providing information about each participant as they passed. "Coming up now is our featured veteran, Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell," the voice boomed. Colonel Mitchell served 4 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, earning the Silver Star for valor in combat and the Purple Heart. A Millfield native and West Point graduate, she now runs Healing Hooves, a therapeutic riding program for veterans and children with special needs. There was a smattering of applause, but Sarah sensed a hesitancy in the crowd's response. She risked a glance at the spectators lining the street and saw a range of expressions, some openly admiring, others curious, and a few unmistakably skeptical. One man, standing with arms crossed near the curb, muttered something to his companion as she passed. Though she couldn't hear his words, his dismissive gesture told her all she needed to know. Sarah refocused her attention forward, swallowing the flicker of hurt. She had anticipated this reaction, had prepared herself for it, but the reality still stung. Valor, sensitive to her tension, flicked an ear back toward her. "It's okay, boy," she murmured, just loud enough for him to hear. "We're doing fine." They continued along Main Street, passing the hardware store where her father had bought her first toolbox, the ice cream parlor where she'd celebrated making the track team, the recruiting office where she'd first expressed interest in military service. Millfield was layered with these memories, a palimpsest of her earlier life before war and injury had rewritten her story. Near the library, Sarah spotted her first therapy client, a 10-year-old girl with cerebral palsy who had made remarkable progress in balance and confidence since beginning sessions at Healing Hooves. The child's face lit up with recognition. "Miss Sarah," she called out, waving enthusiastically. "Your horse looks so pretty." Sarah broke her formal demeanor for a moment to smile and wave back. The genuine delight in the girl's voice cut through the ambient noise of the parade, reminding Sarah of why she had built her new life around the therapeutic power of horses. As they approached the halfway point of the route, Sarah noticed a small group of protesters near the post office. They held signs with slogans like, "Remember all veterans," and "Merit not gender." Her jaw tightened, but she kept her expression neutral, her eyes forward. These were exactly the kind of critics Colonel Richardson had warned her about. People who viewed her inclusion in the parade as a political statement, rather than a recognition of service. Valor, perhaps sensing her increased tension, chose that moment to showcase his training. Without any visible cue from Sarah, he executed a perfect passage, a collected trot with suspended movement that demonstrated exceptional balance and training. It was a movement from his demonstration horse days, a display of grace and power that drew gasps and murmurs of appreciation from the crowd. The unexpected beauty of Valor's movement seemed to temporarily silence even the critics. Sarah, momentarily startled, quickly recovered and worked with him, her subtle shifts in weight and leg position supporting his elegant gait. For several glorious moments, they moved as one entity, the relationship between horse and rider transcending the tensions of the parade. As they returned to a normal walk, Sarah heard increased applause from the spectators. Valor's spontaneous display had changed something in the atmosphere, drawing attention to his magnificence rather than to whatever preconceptions people might have had about Sarah. "That's a military horse," she heard someone explain to their companion. "Look at that training." The parade continued, turning onto Elm Street, where the crowds grew thicker. Here, Sarah began to notice more veterans in the audience, identifiable by their service caps or unit shirts. Many rendered salutes as she passed, a gesture of respect from one service member to another regardless of branch or era of service. She returned each salute crisply, the familiar motion bringing a sense of connection to these strangers who nevertheless shared an understanding of what military service entailed. Near the courthouse, Sarah spotted Jensen and her former unit members, grouped together on a corner. They had positioned themselves strategically so she would see them before reaching the main reviewing stand. Jensen, still in his dress blues and wheelchair, executed a precise salute. The others followed suit, creating a powerful image of solidarity. The lump that formed in Sarah's throat threatened her composure. She returned their salute, holding it a beat longer than protocol required, trying to convey her gratitude for their presence. As she passed them, Martinez called out, "Hua, Colonel!" The traditional army battle cry was echoed by the others, a sound that had followed her through training, deployments, and combat operations, now accompanying her down the streets of her hometown. Approaching the main reviewing stand, Sarah could see the mayor, the parade committee, and other local dignitaries. Diane Henderson stood among them, her face beaming with pride at the success of her recruitment efforts. Sarah straightened her shoulders even more, preparing for the formal moments to come. The announcer's voice boomed once more as they neared the stand. "Ladies and gentlemen, please show your appreciation for Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell and her mount, Valor, a former cavalry demonstration horse who now serves in animal-assisted therapy for wounded warriors." The crowd's response was stronger now, the applause more sustained. Whether won over by Valor's impressive display or simply following the announcer's prompt, the spectators seemed to have warmed to their presence. As they passed directly in front of the reviewing stand, Sarah executed a precise eyes right, the formal military salute to reviewing officers during a parade. The mayor and several veterans on the stand returned her salute, while others applauded. Sarah maintained the salute until they had cleared the stand, then faced forward again, releasing a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. They had passed the most visible and scrutinized portion of the parade route without incident, or so she thought. Just past the reviewing stand, a group of children rushed toward the street, waving small flags and calling out excitedly. A particularly enthusiastic boy broke away from his mother's grasp and darted into the road, directly into Valor's path. Several spectators gasped. Sarah reacted instantly, collecting the reins and applying subtle pressure with her legs to alert Valor to the potential danger. The horse, drawing on his extensive training, came to an immediate halt, standing perfectly still despite the chaos. The child's mother rushed forward, grabbing her son and pulling him back to safety, apologizing profusely. Sarah acknowledged her with a nod, keeping her focus on Valor, whose ears were pricked forward, but who remained remarkably calm given the sudden disruption. "Good boy," Sarah murmured, patting his neck. "Perfect response." The incident had lasted only seconds, but it had demonstrated Valor's exceptional training and temperament. As they resumed their place in the procession, Sarah heard murmurs of appreciation from the crowd. "Did you see that? The horse didn't even flinch. That's some training. The kid could have been hurt if the horse had spooked." The near miss seemed to have shifted the energy of the crowd. The focus was now on Valor's remarkable discipline and Sarah's skilled handling of the situation. The skeptical glances she had noticed earlier were largely replaced by expressions of respect. As they continued along the final stretch of the parade route, Sarah began to relax slightly. They had navigated the most challenging sections, and Valor was performing beautifully. The horse maintained his dignified pace, head high, ears alert, but not anxious. The flags mounted on the saddle fluttered in the gentle breeze, creating a patriotic tableau that seemed to resonate with the spectators. Near the end of the route, Sarah spotted Mike standing with several of her clients from Healing Hooves. They had made a banner that read, "Heroes come in all forms," decorated with handprints in red, white, and blue. Sarah smiled at the sight, touched by their support and the double meaning of the message, acknowledging both human veterans and the animals that helped in their recovery. As they approached the designated end point of the parade, Sarah felt a complex wave of emotions wash over her. Relief that they had completed the route without major incident, pride in Valor's impeccable behavior, gratitude for the support of her brother, her former unit, and her clients, and a surprising sense of accomplishment, not just in having survived the public scrutiny, but in having faced it head-on, on her own terms. The parade coordinator directed them to a cool-down area where equestrian participants could water their horses before loading them for transport. Sarah guided Valor to the designated spot, where Mike was waiting to help her dismount. As she swung her leg over and slid to the ground, she felt the familiar twinge in her residual limb, a reminder of the journey that had brought her to this moment. "You two were amazing," Mike said, taking Valor's reins while Sarah stretched her legs. "That passage he did by the post office? People were blown away." Sarah smiled, stroking Valor's neck. That was all him. He decided it was time to show off a bit. Well, it worked. I overheard people talking about him all along the route after that. "Did you see that horse? Incredible training. Beautiful animal." Mike imitated the impressed tones of the spectators. As they walked Valor around to cool him down, Sarah became aware of people approaching, spectators who had followed the parade to its conclusion and now wanted a closer look at the impressive horse and his uniformed rider. Among them were several veterans, identifiable by their service caps or unit shirts, and families with children who pointed excitedly at Valor. Sarah had not anticipated this informal meet and greet. She had expected to load Valor and retreat to the privacy of her farm as soon as the parade concluded. But the genuine interest in the people's faces made her hesitate. Perhaps this was part of the day's purpose too, not just to be seen from a distance, but to engage, to connect. "Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell?" A woman approached, holding the hand of a young girl about 7 years old. "My daughter has been talking about your horse since you passed us on Main Street. Would it be okay if she pet him?" Sarah looked at the child's hopeful face and nodded. "Of course. Valor loves children." She guided the girl's hand to Valor's shoulder, showing her how to stroke gently. "He was a very special horse in the army before he came to live with me." "He's so big," the girl whispered, her eyes wide with wonder. "But very gentle," Sarah assured her. "That's why he's so good at helping people heal." More people gathered, drawn by the opportunity to see Valor up close. Sarah found herself explaining his background, his training, and his current work in therapeutic riding. She answered questions about the flags he had carried, about his age and breed, about how long they had been together. Gradually, the questions shifted to include her own service. The inquiries were respectful, focused more on her current work than on her combat experiences or injuries. Sarah answered cautiously at first, then with increasing openness as she sensed the genuine interest behind the questions. A teenage boy, hanging back from the main group, finally worked up the courage to approach. "Ma'am, I'm thinking of applying to West Point," he said, his voice cracking slightly with nerves. "Did you always know you wanted to be in the Army?" Sarah considered the question, remembering her own uncertainties at his age. "Not always," she admitted. "But I knew I wanted to serve in some capacity. West Point showed me how to channel that desire into leadership." The boy nodded, absorbing her words. "What's the most important quality for an officer, do you think?" "Integrity," Sarah replied without hesitation. "The willingness to do what's right, even when it's difficult, especially when it's difficult." As they continued talking, Sarah realized that the parade had evolved beyond a simple appearance into something more meaningful, an opportunity for connection and understanding. Through Valor, people were approaching her with curiosity rather than judgment, seeing her as both a veteran and a community member, someone with expertise and experience to share. It wasn't the outcome she had anticipated when she had reluctantly accepted Diane's invitation weeks ago. But standing there in the afternoon sun, with Valor patient and steady beside her, surrounded by people who wanted to learn rather than critique, Sarah felt a shift in her perspective. Perhaps this day wasn't just about being seen, but about truly seeing others as well, recognizing the curiosity, respect, and goodwill that existed alongside the skepticism she had feared. The crowd around Sarah and Valor continued to grow, with more people approaching after hearing others talk about the impressive horse and his rider. What had begun as a small group of curious onlookers was turning into an impromptu reception. Sarah, who had been prepared to retreat as soon as the parade ended, found herself unexpectedly at the center of attention. A man in his 70s, wearing a Vietnam veteran cap adorned with unit pins, made his way through the crowd. He walked with a cane but moved with determined purpose. When he reached Sarah, he rendered a salute that spoke of decades of military bearing. Staff Sergeant James Cooper, 101st Airborne, Vietnam. He introduced himself after Sarah returned his salute. "Wanted to thank you for representing us today, Colonel. Especially the way you handled that situation with the kid running out. Professional all the way." "Thank you, Sergeant," Sarah replied, recognizing the weight of approval from a veteran of his generation. "That was all Valor's training. He knows his job." The older veteran nodded, studying the horse with an appraising eye. "Military animals are something special. Had a scout dog in my unit, saved our hides more times than I can count. Recognized danger before any of us humans could sense it." He reached out a weathered hand, which Valor sniffed politely before allowing the man to pat his neck. "This one's got the same look in his eye, like he understands more than we think." More veterans approached, drawn by Sergeant Cooper's example. They formed a loose circle around Sarah and Valor, sharing brief stories of their service and, more frequently, of the animals they had encountered during deployments. Military working dogs, local strays adopted by units, even horses in some of the more remote regions of Afghanistan. Sarah listened, struck by how Valor was creating a bridge between her and these veterans of different eras and branches. Nearby, Mike was fielding questions about healing hooves, explaining the therapeutic riding program to interested families. Sarah overheard him describing how horses could help veterans with PTSD, children with autism, and people recovering from physical injuries. He was handling the inquiries with ease, allowing her to focus on the veterans who wanted to speak with her directly. A reporter from the Millfield Tribune, presumably Eliza Santos, who had requested the interview, hovered at the edge of the group, notepad in hand, occasionally jotting down observations. True to the agreement, she wasn't approaching Sarah directly, but was clearly gathering material for her article. Sarah caught her eye and gave a small nod, acknowledging her presence and confirming their arrangement to speak later. As the initial excitement began to settle, Sarah became aware of a man standing slightly apart from the main group, watching with an expression she couldn't quite read. He was perhaps in his early 60s, dressed in pressed khakis and a button-down shirt, rather than the casual attire of most spectators. There was something familiar about him, though Sarah couldn't immediately place where she might have known him. The man seemed to be debating whether to approach. Finally, he stepped forward, waiting for a break in the conversation surrounding Sarah. "Colonel Mitchell," he said, his voice carrying a formal tone that immediately put Sarah on alert. "Walter Gaines. I was your father's commanding officer during his first tour in Vietnam." Sarah felt a jolt of recognition. Colonel Gaines. Her father had spoken of him occasionally, always with respect. "Colonel Gaines, sir. It's an honor to meet you. My father thought very highly of you." The older man nodded, a fleeting smile softening his stern features. "John Mitchell was one of the finest soldiers I ever commanded. When I heard his daughter would be in today's parade, I knew I had to see for myself." He glanced at Valor, then back at Sarah. "He would have been proud of what I saw today. The dignity, the precision. It honored his memory." Sarah swallowed against the sudden tightness in her throat. "Thank you, sir. That means a great deal." Colonel Gaines lowered his voice slightly. "I know there were some naysayers about your inclusion in the parade. Ignore them. I've been watching parades in this town for 40 years, and I've never seen a more appropriate representative of our military traditions." Before Sarah could respond, Gaines straightened and rendered a salute. Not the casual acknowledgement of the younger veterans, but a precise formal salute of genuine respect. Sarah returned it with equal precision, the familiar motion connecting her to her father across the decades. As Colonel Gaines stepped back, Sarah noticed Jensen wheeling through the crowd toward her, a broad grin on his face. "Colonel, you're holding court like a celebrity," he teased as he reached her. "The guys want to know if you're up for lunch at McKenna's after this. Sort of an unofficial unit reunion." Sarah hesitated, glancing at Valor. "I should get him home. Let him rest after all this excitement. Already handled, Jensen replied. Your brother said he'd trailer Valor back to the farm if you want to join us. Said something about you deserving some time with your old unit. Sarah looked over at Mike, who gave her a thumbs up from where he stood talking with some of her therapy clients. The gesture conveyed both his willingness to take care of Valor and his encouragement for her to accept the invitation. A few months ago, even a few weeks ago, Sarah would have declined immediately, retreating to the safety and solitude of her farm. But something had shifted during the parade and its aftermath. The connections she had felt with her former unit members, with the local veterans, even with the curious spectators. They reminded her of the community she had been holding at arm's length since her injury. All right, she agreed, surprising herself almost as much as Jensen. Let me make sure Valor's settled first, and I'll meet you there. Jensen's smile widened. Roger that, Colonel. We'll save you a seat. As the crowd gradually dispersed, Sarah focused on preparing Valor for the trip home. She removed the special flag mount, carefully folding her father's flag and returning it to its protective case. The larger parade flag she handed to Mike, who promised to store it safely until she could retrieve it later. You sure you're okay with taking him back? She asked as they walked Valor to the trailer. I can cancel with the unit if you need to be somewhere. Mike shook his head. I'm good. Besides, this is important. When was the last time you spent time with them outside of a hospital room or a formal event? Sarah couldn't remember. After her injury, the unit visits had been frequent at first, then tapered off as she withdrew further into herself. Not because they had abandoned her, but because she had made it increasingly difficult for them to reach her. Go, Mike urged. Valor and I will be fine. Maybe I'll even take him for a short trail ride if he's up for it. Sarah smiled at the thought of her burly construction contractor brother on Valor's back. He'd like that. Just keep it easy. He's earned a restful afternoon. After ensuring Valor was comfortably loaded in the trailer, Sarah hugged her brother, a rare gesture of physical affection between the typically reserved siblings. Thank you, she murmured, for everything. I couldn't have done this without you. Mike returned the hug, then stepped back with a grin. Sure you could have, but it was more fun this way. As Mike drove off with Valor, Sarah took a moment to collect herself. She was still in her dress uniform, still very much on public display. She considered changing into civilian clothes but decided against it. The uniform had become less of a costume and more of a reconnection to a significant part of herself throughout the day. She would wear it to lunch with her unit, an acknowledgement of the bonds that still existed despite all that had changed. McKenna's pub was only a few blocks from the parade route, a local institution known for its hearty comfort food and welcoming atmosphere. As Sarah approached, she could see her former unit members through the window, occupying a large table in the corner. They were still in their various uniforms or veterans' attire, creating a colorful display of military pride. Sarah paused outside, watching them for a moment. Martinez was gesturing animatedly, likely telling one of his infamous stories. Brooks was showing something on her camera to Sanchez, probably parade photos. Colonel Richardson sat at the head of the table, his posture perfect even in this casual setting. These people had been her family for years, through deployments, through grueling training, through the best and worst moments of her military career. And then, after her injury, she had pushed them away, convinced that the broken version of herself had no place among them. How wrong she had been. Taking a deep breath, Sarah opened the door and stepped inside. The conversation at their table immediately paused, and all heads turned toward her. Martinez was the first to react, standing and raising his glass. To Colonel Mitchell, he announced, who reminded Millfield today what a real hero looks like. The others rose as well, glasses lifted in a toast that made Sarah's cheeks flush with embarrassment and gratitude. As she made her way to the empty seat they had saved for her, patrons from other tables, many of whom had witnessed the parade, nodded respectfully or offered brief words of appreciation. I heard about what happened with that kid running into the street, Brooks said as Sarah settled into her chair. Wish I'd had my camera ready. That horse of yours didn't even flinch." "That's Valor," Sarah replied, unable to keep the pride from her voice. "Nothing rattles him, not even after retirement." "Like his rider," Colonel Richardson commented, his usual gruffness softened by evident approval. "Maintaining composure under pressure always was your strong suit, Mitchell." The conversation flowed easily after that, shifting between parade moments, memories of shared deployments, and updates on unit members who couldn't be present. Sarah found herself laughing at Martinez's outrageous stories, offering her own recollections, and genuinely enjoying the camaraderie she had denied herself for too long. As they finished their meals, Colonel Richardson cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. "I have something to share with you all, especially you, Mitchell." The table quieted, sensing the significance in his tone. "I received word last week that our petition has been approved," he continued. "The forward operating base where Mitchell's unit was stationed during her final deployment will be renamed FOB Mitchell Ramirez, in honor of Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell and Staff Sergeant Ramirez." A shocked silence fell over the table. Ramirez had been the soldier who died in the IED explosion that had injured Sarah, a young sergeant with exceptional promise who had pushed her out of the worst of the blast's path, saving her life at the cost of his own. "The renaming ceremony will take place next month," Richardson added. "I hope all of you will consider attending." Sarah stared at her former commander, overwhelmed by the news. Having a FOB named after living personnel was extremely rare, usually reserved for those who had demonstrated extraordinary heroism. That they had included Ramirez in the honor made it even more meaningful, a recognition that her survival had come at an immeasurable cost. "Sir, I don't know what to say," she finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "You don't need to say anything," Richardson replied. "Your actions that day speak for themselves, as did your performance today. You continue to represent the best of what our military stands for, Mitchell, whether in uniform or civilian attire." The others murmured agreement, their expressions solemn yet proud. Sarah felt the weight of their respect, their understanding of what this recognition truly meant. It wasn't just about her individual actions during that fateful mission, but about honoring the sacrifice of Ramirez and acknowledging the ongoing service of veterans like herself, who continued to find ways to serve even after leaving active duty. As lunch concluded and the group prepared to depart, Brooks approached Sarah with her camera. "I got some amazing shots of you and Valor during the parade," she said. "Would you mind if I send them to the local paper? Their photographer was only at the main reviewing stand, but I was mobile, got different angles." Sarah hesitated, her instinctive privacy warring with the new openness she had begun to embrace. "What kind of shots?" Brooks scrolled through her camera, showing Sarah several images. Valor executing his perfect passage near the post office, Sarah rendering a salute to the veterans on the corner, the two of them passing the reviewing stand with flags flying. The photos captured a dignity and presence that Sarah hadn't realized they projected. "These are beautiful," she admitted. "Yes, you can share them with the paper." Brooks beamed. "Great. Oh, and I got something else I thought you might want for yourself." She scrolled to another image, this one showing Sarah and Valor surrounded by the curious children after the parade, with Sarah bending slightly to help a little girl pet Valor's neck. The photo captured an expression on Sarah's face that she rarely saw in mirrors these days, one of genuine joy and connection. "I'd like a copy of that one," Sarah said softly, "for my office at the farm." As they exited the restaurant, Sarah found herself walking alongside Colonel Richardson. "Will you attend the renaming ceremony, sir?" she asked. "Wouldn't miss it," he replied. "And I hope you'll consider coming as well, Mitchell. I know how difficult it might be, returning to that part of the world. But it would mean a great deal to have you there." Sarah nodded slowly. A month ago, she would have refused immediately, the thought of returning to Afghanistan too overwhelming to contemplate. But after today, after reconnecting with her unit, after facing her hometown in uniform, after rediscovering the strength that came from embracing, rather than hiding her history, the possibility seemed less daunting. "I'll think about it seriously, sir," she promised. As the group dispersed with handshakes and plans to meet again soon, Sarah found herself alone on the sidewalk, still in her dress uniform with the afternoon sun warm on her face. The parade was over, yet she felt no rush to change back into civilian clothes, no urgent need to retreat to the privacy of her farm. Instead, she decided to walk through town for a while, allowing herself to be seen not as a spectacle, but as a natural part of the community. It was a small step, but an important one, reclaiming her place in Millfield, not just as the wounded veteran who lived on the outskirts of town, but as Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell, Silver Star recipient, therapeutic riding instructor, and citizen who had found her way home in more ways than one. As she walked along Main Street, past shops and cafes where people still gathered after the parade, Sarah noticed something surprising. The stares and whispers she had feared seemed largely absent. Instead, there were respectful nods, warm smiles, and the occasional "thank you for your service," offered without the awkwardness she had come to expect. It was as if her participation in the parade had normalized her presence, transforming her from an object of curiosity or pity into a recognized and valued member of the community. Near the town square, Sarah passed the memorial that listed Millfield's fallen service members from various conflicts. She paused, reading the names, some familiar from her childhood, others added during her own years of service. Among them was her father's best friend, lost in the Gulf War, and a classmate who had died in the early days of Operation Iraqi Freedom. She stood in silent reflection, honoring their memory and acknowledging her connection to their sacrifice. It was a moment of quiet communion, with the fallen, with her hometown, and with her own journey from the eager young recruit who had left Millfield to the battle-tested veteran who had returned. As Sarah turned to continue her walk, she noticed a young woman watching her from a nearby bench. The woman appeared to be in her early 20s, with the straight posture and alert gaze that Sarah recognized as military bearing. After a moment's hesitation, the young woman approached. "Excuse me, Colonel," she said, her voice carrying a hint of nervousness beneath its formal tone. "I'm Cadet Wilson from the ROTC program at State. I saw you in the parade and, well, I just wanted to say you're the reason I joined. I saw an article about you years ago when you received your Silver Star. It made me realize women could serve in combat roles, could lead." Sarah was momentarily speechless, unprepared for the impact her service had apparently had on others. Thank you, Cadet. That's quite an honor to hear. Would you have any advice?" the young woman asked. "For someone just starting out?" Sarah considered the question, thinking of all she had learned, about leadership, about resilience, about the cost and value of service. "Remember that being a good officer isn't about personal glory," she finally said. "It's about taking care of your people, making decisions you can live with even on the hardest days, and finding the courage to keep going when everything in you wants to stop." The cadet nodded, absorbing her words with serious attention. "Thank you, ma'am. That helps more than you know." As the young woman departed with a crisp salute, Sarah felt a curious sense of completion, as if some circle had closed, connecting her past service with this future officer's journey. Her visibility today had mattered, not just for her own healing, but for others who might see in her story something that resonated with their own aspirations or struggles. The realization settled around her shoulders like a mantle, not a burden, but a responsibility she was finally ready to accept. By agreeing to ride in the parade, she had unknowingly opened a door that had been closed for too long, allowing herself to be not just seen but truly recognized for all that she was: soldier and civilian, wounded and healing, leader and mentor. With the afternoon waning and her spirit lighter than it had been in years, Sarah turned toward the outskirts of town, ready to return to the farm where valor awaited. There was still the interview with Eliza Santos to prepare for, the everyday work of running Healing Hooves, and now the possibility of attending the FOB renaming ceremony. Life was suddenly fuller, more connected than it had been since her injury. As she walked, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Mike. "Valor's home safe. Enjoyed his victory lap around the paddock. Seems pretty pleased with himself. You coming back soon? Sarah smiled, typing a quick reply. On my way. Tell him his lieutenant colonel is proud of him. And she was proud. Of Valor. Of herself. Of the journey they had taken together from wounded warriors to parade participants to whatever came next. The day had been a revelation. Not because everything had gone perfectly, but because she had faced her fears and found herself still standing, still capable of connection and purpose and joy. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell straightened her uniform jacket, adjusted her cover, and continued her walk home, her stride purposeful and her head held high. The morning after the parade dawned with a gentle rain that pattered against Sarah's bedroom window. She lay awake, listening to the rhythmic sound and processing the events of the previous day. The parade itself, Valor's impressive performance, the unexpected connections with veterans and townspeople, lunch with her former unit. It all swirled in her mind like leaves caught in an eddy. She had expected to feel depleted after such intense public exposure, but instead found herself energized, as if some long-dormant part of her had reawakened. The sensation was both unfamiliar and reminiscent of how she'd felt in the early days of her military career, purposeful, engaged with the world around her. Sarah rose and dressed in her usual work attire, jeans, boots, and a light flannel shirt. Her dress uniform hung in the closet once more, but now it seemed less like a relic and more like a bridge between her past and present selves. She had worn it with pride yesterday, might wear it again for the FOB renaming ceremony if she decided to attend. Outside, Valor nickered a greeting from his stall as she approached the barn. Sarah smiled, running her hand along his strong neck. Quite a day we had, huh? She murmured, checking him for any lingering stiffness from the parade. His legs were cool and tight, no sign of the swelling that had concerned her the previous week. You were the star of the show, just like in your army days. As she completed morning chores, Sarah's phone chimed with messages. Mike checking in, Jensen thanking her for joining them for lunch, Brooks sending the promised photos. There was also a polite reminder from Eliza Santos about their arranged interview. They had scheduled it for that afternoon at Healing Hooves, giving Sarah time to recover from the parade and attend to her regular duties. By mid-morning, the rain had stopped, leaving the farm glistening under clearing skies. Sarah decided to turn Valor out in the paddock, knowing he would enjoy the freedom after yesterday's formal constraints. She watched as he trotted across the rain-dampened ground, head high, tail flagged, the picture of equine confidence. He knows he did good, said a voice behind her. Sarah turned to find Jensen wheeling toward her along the gravel path from the parking area. He wasn't scheduled for a therapy session today, which meant this was a social call, something that would have been unthinkable just weeks ago. What brings you out here on a holiday? She asked, leaning against the paddock fence. Jensen shrugged, positioning his wheelchair beside her. Thought you might need help with chores after yesterday. Plus, I wanted to see how the parade hero was doing. He nodded toward Valor, who was now rolling luxuriously in a patch of soft earth. Sarah laughed at the sight of her dignified parade mount covering himself in mud. So much for military bearing, she said, shaking her head. And I appreciate the offer, but I've got things under control. Never doubted it, Colonel. Jensen's tone was light, but his expression turned more serious as he continued. Actually, I wanted to thank you. What you did yesterday, it matters. Not just for you, but for all of us who came back different than when we left. Sarah felt a flutter of emotion in her chest. I'm not sure I did anything special. Just rode my horse down Main Street. It was more than that, Jensen insisted. You showed up as exactly who you are now, not hiding your service or your injury, not pretending the war didn't change you. Do you have any idea how powerful that is for someone like me? He gestured to his wheelchair. Seeing you in that uniform, on that horse, looking like you belonged there. It helps the rest of us believe we might belong somewhere too. Sarah swallowed against the sudden tightness in her throat. I didn't think of it that way. That's because you're too busy worrying about everyone else, Jensen said with a knowing smile. Classic officer thinking, always focused on the mission, never on the impact. They fell into companionable silence, watching Valor as he finished his roll and trotted toward the water trough. Sarah found herself considering Jensen's words, turning them over like river stones in her mind. Had her participation really meant so much to others? The young cadet's comments yesterday suggested a similar impact. Perhaps her visibility mattered in ways she hadn't anticipated. "The reporter's coming this afternoon," Sarah said, changing the subject. "From the Tribune." Jensen nodded. Brooks mentioned that. She also said she sent some photos to the paper, said they were amazing. They were, Sarah admitted. She has a good eye. "Any idea what you'll say in the interview?" Sarah shrugged. "The truth, I guess. About my service, about healing hooves, about valor. Nothing particularly newsworthy." Jensen gave her a sidelong glance. "Don't underestimate your story, Colonel. Not everyone goes from combat to creating a place like this." He gestured to the farm around them. "From what I hear, half the town is talking about you today, and most of it's good." "Most of it?" Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Well, there's always going to be a few sour grapes," Jensen conceded. "But they're getting drowned out by all the positive buzz, especially after that thing with the kid running into the street. Word is you and Valor saved a child's life." Sarah rolled her eyes. "That's a bit dramatic. We just stopped. Any decent rider and well-trained horse would have done the same." "Maybe, but it makes for a good story, and stories matter. They're how people make sense of things they don't fully understand, like military service or coming home wounded." Sarah considered this as they continued watching Valor, who had now settled into grazing contentedly. Perhaps Jensen was right. Perhaps the narrative that emerged from yesterday's parade could serve a purpose beyond her personal journey. After Jensen departed, promising to return for his regular therapy session later in the week, Sarah spent the rest of the morning preparing for the interview. She tidied the small office where she handled the administrative side of Healing Hooves, gathered brochures about therapeutic riding, and made sure Valor was clean and presentable again after his muddy indulgence. Eliza Santos arrived precisely at the appointed time, a sleek leather messenger bag slung over one shoulder and a professional camera hanging around her neck. She was younger than Sarah had expected, perhaps in her early 30s, with an alertness in her eyes that suggested she missed very little. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with me, Colonel Mitchell," she said, shaking Sarah's hand with a firm grip. "I know you initially declined an interview, so I appreciate your reconsideration. Please, call me Sarah," she replied, leading the reporter toward her office. "And it seemed appropriate to follow through after the parade. Though I should warn you, I'm not particularly comfortable being the center of attention." Eliza smiled. "Noted. I'll try to make this as painless as possible." They settled into the office where Sarah had prepared coffee and arranged chairs to face the large window overlooking the main arena. The setting allowed them to converse while watching the farm in operation. A therapy session was underway with one of Sarah's instructors working with a child with autism. The interview began with standard questions about Sarah's military career, her decision to enlist, her progression through the ranks, her deployments. Sarah answered succinctly but honestly, neither dramatizing nor minimizing her experiences. When Eliza broached the subject of her final mission and subsequent injury, Sarah provided the facts without embellishment, acknowledging the sacrifice of Staff Sergeant Ramirez without delving into the emotional aftermath. "And that's when you returned to Millfield?" Eliza asked, her pen moving steadily across her notepad despite the digital recorder capturing their conversation. "Eventually," Sarah confirmed. "After medical retirement and rehabilitation, I needed somewhere familiar to rebuild my life, and this was home." "What led you to establish Healing Hooves?" Sarah glanced out the window, watching as the young therapy client guided his mount through a series of colorful obstacles, his face alight with concentration and accomplishment. "I discovered equine therapy during my own recovery," she explained. "It was one of the few things that helped with both the physical and psychological aspects of healing. When I returned to Millfield, I realized there was nothing similar in this area, despite the need among veterans and the special needs community." It seemed like an opportunity to create something meaningful. And that's where Valor came into your life? Sarah smiled. Yes. He was one of the therapy horses at the VA program where I was a patient. We connected immediately. Both of us were adjusting to new realities after careers in service. When I established Healing Hooves and had the resources, I was able to adopt him. Eliza's questions continued, focusing now on the parade, Sarah's initial reluctance, her preparation with Valor, her experience during the event itself. Sarah found herself sharing more than she had intended, describing the mixed reception she had anticipated and the surprisingly positive response they had actually received. Many people have commented on the incident with the child who ran into the street, Eliza noted. They were impressed by how quickly you and Valor responded, preventing what could have been a serious accident. Sarah shook her head slightly. That was more Valor than me. He's trained to remain calm in chaotic situations. It's what made him such an effective cavalry demonstration horse, and what makes him valuable in therapy work now. He assesses rather than reacts, which is a rare quality in a horse. Some might say it's a rare quality in humans too, Eliza observed with a smile. Speaking of which, I understand your former unit members attended the parade specifically to support you? They did, Sarah acknowledged, a warmth entering her voice. It meant a great deal to have them there. Military bonds run deep, even after active service ends. As the interview progressed, Sarah found herself growing more comfortable with Eliza's thoughtful questions and genuine interest in Healing Hooves. They moved from the office to tour the facilities, with Sarah explaining the various programs they offered and introducing some of the other therapy horses. Throughout, Eliza took photos and notes, occasionally asking for clarification but mostly allowing Sarah to guide the conversation. They ended at Valor's paddock, where the horse approached the fence with ears pricked forward, obviously curious about the visitor. Eliza raised her camera, capturing his intelligent expression and regal bearing. He really is magnificent, she commented, lowering the camera. I can see why he made such an impression yesterday. Sarah reached out to stroke Valor's forehead. He's always had presence. Even when I first met him, when we were both at low points, there was something special about him, a dignity that transcended circumstances. Eliza seemed to consider this, then asked, Do you think there's a parallel there, between Valor's journey and your own? The question caught Sarah off guard. She hadn't thought of it quite that way before, though the connection seemed obvious now that Eliza had pointed it out. I suppose there is, she admitted. We both had careers defined by service. We both experienced trauma that ended those careers, and we both found a new purpose helping others heal. She paused, reflecting. Though I'd say Valor adapted more gracefully than I did. How so? Sarah ran her hand along Valor's sleek neck, gathering her thoughts. Valor never seemed to resent the change in his circumstances. He embraced his new role immediately, as if he understood its importance. It took me much longer to accept that my value didn't disappear with my active duty status, that I could still serve, just differently. Eliza nodded, making a note. And yesterday's parade, did that experience change anything for you? It did, Sarah said slowly, surprising herself with the admission. I've spent 3 years trying to separate my military identity from my civilian life, as if they were mutually exclusive. Yesterday showed me they're not. They're different chapters of the same story. I don't need to hide one to live authentically in the other. The reporter smiled, seemingly pleased with this insight. That's a powerful realization. It is, Sarah agreed, and it's one I might not have reached without Valor. He's been the constant between those chapters, carrying me forward quite literally when I couldn't see the path myself. As they concluded the interview, Eliza asked if she could take a few more photos of Sarah and Valor together. Sarah agreed, retrieving a halter and leading Valor to a picturesque spot near the arena, where the afternoon light cast a golden glow across the landscape. Unlike the stiff, formal poses she had expected, Eliza encouraged natural interaction, Sarah grooming Valor, the two walking side by side, a quiet moment with Sarah's forehead resting against Valor's neck. The resulting images, which Eliza showed her on the camera's display, captured an intimacy and partnership that formal portraits could never convey. "These are beautiful," Sarah said, genuinely impressed. "You have a gift for seeing beyond the surface." Eliza smiled. "That's the goal of good journalism, too, looking past the obvious story to find the deeper truth. Thank you for trusting me with yours." After the reporter departed, promising to send a draft of the article before publication, Sarah returned to Valor's paddock with a curry comb. The repetitive motion of grooming was soothing for both of them, a ritual that predated human language but communicated care and connection nonetheless. As she worked, Sarah's thoughts returned to Eliza's observation about the parallels between her journey and Valor's. It was true that the horse had shown remarkable adaptability, moving from military precision to therapeutic patience without apparent resistance. What had taken her years of struggle, Valor had accomplished with equine pragmatism, accepting what was, finding purpose in the present, moving forward without being haunted by the past. "You've been trying to teach me that all along, haven't you?" she murmured, working the comb in gentle circles. Valor sighed contentedly, leaning slightly into the pressure, that the past shapes us, but doesn't have to define us. The remainder of the day passed in familiar routines: feeding, turnout, paperwork, a call with Mike to share details of the interview. Yet Sarah felt a subtle shift in her perspective, as if yesterday's parade and today's reflections had altered something fundamental in how she viewed herself and her place in the world. That evening, as dusk settled over the farm, Sarah sat on her porch with a cup of tea, watching as bats began their nightly aerial dance against the darkening sky. Her phone chimed with a text from Brooks. The Millfield Tribune had already published a preview of tomorrow's feature article online, including several of Brooks' parade photos. The headline read, "Local hero and former cavalry horse steal the show at Memorial Day Parade." Sarah clicked the link, both curious and apprehensive about how she would be portrayed. The preview was brief but powerful, describing the breathtaking sight of Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell and Valor processing down Main Street, the moment of heart-stopping bravery when they prevented a potential accident, and the visible pride of fellow veterans who had gathered to support one of their own. The accompanying photos were stunning. Valor in mid-passage, his powerful muscles clearly defined, Sarah rendering a precise salute as they passed the reviewing stand, and a remarkable shot capturing the exact moment when Valor had halted to avoid the child, his stance perfectly balanced despite the abrupt stop, Sarah's posture confident and controlled in the saddle. Seeing these images, Sarah understood why the parade had generated such positive response. Together, she and Valor had presented a powerful visual representation of military precision, discipline, and grace, qualities that transcended gender, transcended disability, transcended the divisions that sometimes seem to fracture the community and the country. Without intending to, they had offered something people hungered for, a reminder of shared values, of service that continued beyond uniform, of resilience that transformed rather than surrendered to adversity. As she sat with this realization, Sarah's phone rang. The caller ID showed Colonel Richardson's name. "Mitchell," she answered, falling automatically into military phone etiquette. "Evening, Colonel," Richardson's gravelly voice replied. "Hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all, sir. I was just reviewing the Tribune's preview of tomorrow's article." "Ah, I saw that. Fine representation of you and that impressive horse. But that's not why I'm calling." He paused briefly. "I wanted to follow up on our conversation about the FOB renaming ceremony. The Pentagon needs to know who's attending by the end of the week for security arrangements." Sarah took a deep breath. Yesterday, the prospect of returning to Afghanistan had seemed daunting, but potentially manageable. Today, with the parade behind her and a new sense of integration between her military and civilian identities, the decision felt clearer. "I'll be there, sir," she said firmly. "For Ramirez and for the unit." "Excellent." The approval in Richardson's voice was evident. "There's one more thing. The ceremony planners have asked if you would consider saying a few words as the surviving officer for whom the base is being partially named." Sarah hesitated. Public speaking had never been her favorite aspect of command, though she had become proficient at it through necessity. Speaking at this particular ceremony, in that particular place, would require a different kind of courage altogether. But hadn't the parade shown her that stepping into visibility, however uncomfortable, could serve purposes beyond her personal comfort? That her story, her complete story, including both triumph and trauma, might matter to others still finding their way. "I would be honored, sir," she finally replied, "though I'll need some time to prepare appropriate remarks. Of course, I'll let them know." Richardson sounded pleased. "Ann Mitchell, I'm proud of you. Not just for agreeing to this, but for everything you've built since coming home. That farm of yours, it's making a difference. I've heard from several veterans who've benefited from your program." The unexpected praise from her former commander left Sarah momentarily speechless. "Thank you, sir," she managed. "That means a great deal." After ending the call, Sarah remained on the porch as full darkness descended, stars emerging in the clear night sky. The decision to attend the ceremony, to speak publicly about her service and Ramirez's sacrifice, felt right. Another step in the journey of reconciliation she had begun by agreeing to ride in the parade. From the barn came the soft sounds of horses settling for the night, the rustle of hay, the occasional snort or gentle nicker. Sarah smiled, thinking of Valor in his stall, perhaps dreaming of his moment in the spotlight, or simply enjoying the comfort of routine after yesterday's excitement. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, therapy clients to assist, a full article to read, preparations for the upcoming ceremony. But for now, in this quiet moment between day and night, Sarah felt a sense of peace that had eluded her for far too long. The peace that comes not from hiding from one's past, but from embracing it as an essential part of an ongoing story. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell, Silver Star recipient, amputee, therapeutic riding instructor, and parade participant, lifted her face to the night sky and breathed deeply, grateful for the journey that had brought her here and curious about where it might lead next. The full article in the Millfield Tribune appeared the next morning, taking up the entire front page and continuing on to 2 inside pages. Eliza Santos had crafted a thoughtful, nuanced piece that wove together Sarah's military service, her injury and recovery, her work at Healing Hooves, and her parade appearance into a cohesive narrative about transformation and continued service. The headline read, "From Battlefield to Home Front, Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell's Journey of Healing and Hope." Sarah read it over coffee, her emotions shifting between appreciation for Eliza's sensitive handling of difficult topics and discomfort at seeing her life laid out so publicly. The reporter had kept her promise to focus on the therapeutic riding program as much as on Sarah herself, including quotes from clients and parents about the impact Healing Hooves had made on their lives. There were also comments from veterans who had attended the parade, expressing their pride in seeing one of their own represented with such dignity. Her phone began ringing before she had finished her first cup of coffee. Mike called to congratulate her on the article. Jensen texted that the Tribune's website had crashed briefly from the high traffic to the online version. Even Diane Henderson called, practically vibrating with excitement about the positive attention the parade was receiving. "The mayor wants to know if you'd consider being Grand Marshal next year," Diane said, her voice breathless with enthusiasm. "The response to your participation has been overwhelmingly positive." Sarah nearly choked on her coffee. "Diane, I appreciate the offer, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. I'm still processing this year's parade." Of course," Diane backpedaled quickly. "Just think about it, no pressure. And by the way, I've had 3 different people ask how they can support Healing Hooves. I hope you don't mind that I gave them your website." After assuring Diane that referrals were always welcome, Sarah hung up and sat back, contemplating this unexpected development. The parade had been a personal milestone for her, a step toward integrating her military past with her civilian present. She hadn't anticipated that it might also raise the profile of Healing Hooves or generate community interest in the program. By mid-morning, Sarah had received several emails from people inquiring about volunteer opportunities or how to refer clients to the therapeutic riding program. 2 local business owners expressed interest in sponsoring a veteran for a series of sessions. The mother of a child with Down syndrome asked about the possibility of joining the next session group. Sarah found herself simultaneously overwhelmed by the attention and cautiously optimistic about what it might mean for the farm's sustainability. Healing Hooves operated largely on grants, donations, and the modest fees that some clients could afford to pay. Increased community support could allow them to expand services, perhaps even hire another instructor to handle the growing interest. As she responded to emails between therapy sessions, Sarah noticed a car pulling into the farm driveway, an unfamiliar sedan with government plates. She stepped onto the porch, curious and slightly wary, as a man in his 50s emerged from the driver's side. He wore a suit that practically screamed federal employee and carried a leather portfolio under one arm. "Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell," he called, approaching with an outstretched hand. "I'm David Mercer, Veterans Affairs. I hope I'm not interrupting your day." Sarah shook his hand, her curiosity increasing. "Not at all. What brings the VA out to Healing Hooves?" Mercer smiled, his weathered face creasing with genuine warmth. "I read the article in this morning's Tribune. Impressive work you're doing here. I'm with the Office of Rural Veterans, and we've been looking for programs like yours to potentially partner with." Sarah blinked, momentarily taken aback. "Partner how exactly?" "May I?" Mercer gestured toward the porch, and Sarah nodded, inviting him to sit in one of the Adirondack chairs while she took the other. "The VA has been expanding its community care networks, especially in rural areas where veterans might have limited access to VA facilities," Mercer explained, opening his portfolio. "Therapeutic riding has shown promising results for PTSD, physical rehabilitation, and reintegration support, but there aren't enough VA-affiliated programs to meet the need." He extracted a folder and handed it to Sarah. "We're piloting a partnership initiative that would allow veterans to receive therapeutic riding services at approved facilities like yours, with the VA covering the costs. It's similar to the community care model we use for other specialty services." Sarah leafed through the materials, her mind racing with possibilities. Such a partnership would provide stable funding for veteran services at Healing Hooves, potentially allowing her to reach more former service members who might benefit from equine therapy. "This seems too good to be true," she said cautiously. "What's the catch?" Mercer chuckled. "Healthy skepticism. I'd expect nothing less from an officer. The catch, if you want to call it that, is paperwork and compliance requirements. The VA has specific standards for care, documentation, and facility safety. But from what I've seen here and read in the article, you're probably already meeting most of them." They spent the next hour discussing the details of the potential partnership, the application process, the veteran referral system, the reimbursement structure. By the time Mercer departed, promising to send the formal application materials, Sarah felt a curious mixture of excitement and trepidation. This opportunity could transform Healing Hooves from a small, struggling nonprofit into a recognized component of veteran care in the region. As she watched Mercer's car disappear down the driveway, Sarah reflected on the chain of events that had led to this moment. If she hadn't agreed to participate in the parade, if Eliza hadn't written such a compelling article, if Mercer hadn't happened to read it, none of this would be happening now. It was a reminder of how seemingly small decisions could lead to unexpected opportunities. The remainder of the day passed in a whirlwind of activity, therapy sessions, chores, returning phone calls from people who had read the article. By evening, Sarah was physically exhausted but mentally energized in a way she hadn't experienced in years. It was the familiar feeling of mission and purpose, of seeing a path forward that held meaning beyond her personal journey. After completing evening feeding, Sarah lingered in the barn, stopping at Valor's stall. The horse greeted her with a gentle nicker, pushing his nose against her shoulder in silent communication. "You started all this, you know," she told him, scratching his favorite spot behind his ears. "If we hadn't connected at that VA program, if you hadn't shown me what healing could look like." Valor watched her with those soulful eyes that seemed to understand more than any animal should, and Sarah felt a surge of gratitude for this magnificent creature who had carried her through the darkest period of her life, and now stood with her as new possibilities emerged. A sound at the barn entrance made them both look up. Mike stood there, a bottle of champagne in one hand and 2 glasses in the other. "Thought we should celebrate," he said, holding up the bottle. "The article, the VA interest, all of it." Sarah smiled, giving Valor a final pat before joining her brother. "Champagne seems a bit extravagant." "Not every day my sister makes the front page and gets offered a government contract in the same day," Mike countered, leading the way to the small patio beside Sarah's cabin. As they settled into the outdoor chairs, Mike expertly uncorked the bottle and poured 2 glasses. "To healing hooves," he proposed, raising his glass, "and to the stubborn lieutenant colonel who built it." Sarah laughed, clinking her glass against his, "and to the equally stubborn brother who wouldn't let her hide away forever." They sipped in companionable silence for a moment, watching as the setting sun painted the farm in shades of gold and amber. The therapy horses grazed peacefully in the pasture, occasional swishes of their tails catching the fading light. "Did you ever think, when you started this place, that it would turn into something like this?" Mike asked, gesturing broadly to encompass the farm, and by extension, the new opportunities on the horizon. Sarah considered the question, thinking back to those early days when she had first returned to Millfield, broken in body and spirit. Honestly? No. At first it was just survival, finding something to get me out of bed each morning. Then it became about helping others because that gave me purpose when I couldn't find meaning in helping myself. She paused, watching a pair of barn swallows dart through the evening air. "I never imagined articles or partnerships or any kind of recognition. That wasn't the point. But you deserve it," Mike said firmly. "Not just for your military service, but for what you've built here. This place changes lives, Sarah. I've seen it." Before she could respond, her phone chimed with an incoming text. It was from Brooks, containing a link and the message, "Check this out. You're going viral, Colonel." Curious, Sarah opened the link to find a video posted on a popular social media platform. It showed Valor executing his unexpected passage during the parade, moving with breathtaking grace and precision as Sarah sat perfectly balanced in the saddle. The video had already accumulated thousands of views and hundreds of comments, most expressing admiration for the horse's training and performance. "Looks like Valor's becoming a celebrity," she said, showing Mike the video. He watched it, whistling softly. "That's impressive as hell. No wonder people were blown away." Sarah scrolled through some of the comments, surprised by their tone. Unlike the often caustic nature of online discourse, these were overwhelmingly positive. "That's what real horsemanship looks like. Cavalry horses are something else. Beautiful training." The writer is Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell, Silver Star recipient. Read her story in the Millfield Tribune. "My daughter wants riding lessons now. Thanks, Colonel Mitchell." One comment in particular caught her attention. "As a fellow wounded warrior, seeing Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell representing us with such dignity means more than I can express. This is what recovery looks like." Sarah handed the phone back to Mike, suddenly finding it difficult to speak past the lump in her throat. "You're touching lives you don't even know about," he said softly, understanding her emotion without needing words. "That's a special kind of service, sis." They finished their champagne as darkness settled over the farm, the conversation shifting to practical matters, the upcoming FOB renaming ceremony, the speech Sarah would need to prepare, the logistics of traveling to Afghanistan. Mike offered to look after the farm during her absence, already familiar with the daily routines from helping out on previous occasions. "I've been thinking about the ceremony," Sarah said as they cleared the glasses. "About what I want to say about Ramirez, about that day." Mike nodded, giving her space to continue. "For so long I've focused on what was lost, my career, my leg, Ramirez's life. But lately I've been thinking about what was preserved." She glanced toward the barn where Valor was settled for the night. "Not just my life, but the possibility of building something meaningful from the wreckage. I don't think I could have seen that before the parade, before reconnecting with the unit, before all of this." "That sounds like the beginning of a powerful speech," Mike observed, focusing on continuation rather than conclusion. Sarah smiled at her brother's insight. "Exactly. It's not about endpoints, discharge or retirement or even injury. It's about the journey that continues beyond those moments, shaped by them, but not defined by them. The following days brought a steady stream of developments. The VA application materials arrived, and Sarah began the process of documenting Healing Hooves' programs and procedures to meet their requirements. Eliza Santos called to say the Tribune wanted to run a follow-up story focusing specifically on the therapeutic riding program, possibly as part of a series on innovative health services in rural communities. Perhaps most surprisingly, Sarah received an email from the Commandant of the U.S. Army Cavalry School at Fort Riley, inquiring whether she and Valor might be interested in giving a demonstration and lecture about the transition from military service to therapeutic work. The Commandant had seen the viral video and recognized the advanced training that only came from military horsemanship programs. "They want us to talk to cavalry trainees," Sarah told Valor as she groomed him that evening. "About second chapters and new missions. What do you think? Ready for a road trip to Kansas?" Valor's ears pricked forward at her voice, his intelligent eyes fixed on her face as if considering the proposition. Then he nudged her pocket where she usually kept apple slices, making her laugh. "Always focused on the practical, aren't you? Yes, there would be treats involved, I'm sure." The invitation prompted Sarah to reach out to her former commanding officer from the Cavalry Demonstration Unit, Colonel James Lawrence, now retired and running a horse farm in Virginia. They hadn't spoken since before her final deployment, and Sarah felt a momentary hesitation as the phone rang. Would he even remember her? Would he want to hear from a former officer whose career had ended in injury rather than advancement? "Mitchell." Lawrence's booming voice dispelled her concerns immediately. "I was hoping you'd call after I saw that video. Valor hasn't lost a step, has he? And neither have you, from what I could see." Their conversation flowed easily, years melting away as they discussed Valor's performance in the parade, the viral video, and the invitation from Fort Riley. Lawrence offered advice on structuring the demonstration to be most beneficial for trainees, emphasizing the connections between military horsemanship and therapeutic riding techniques. "You know, when Valor was retired from the demonstration team, we were concerned about finding the right placement for him," Lawrence said near the end of their call. "He was always special, more intuitive than most, with that rare combination of precision and sensitivity. Seeing what you two have accomplished together confirms we made the right choice." After hanging up, Sarah sat on the porch steps, watching the sunset and reflecting on Lawrence's words. The right choice. How many decisions, large and small, had led to this moment? Her enlistment, her cavalry training, her injury, Valor's retirement, their reunion at the VA program, her return to Millfield, her reluctant agreement to ride in the parade. Each one a thread in the tapestry of her life, creating a pattern she could only now begin to discern. The next morning brought yet another surprise. Sarah was in the arena, working with a new therapy client, a teenage girl with anxiety so severe she rarely spoke, when Mike appeared at the gate, waving to get her attention without disrupting the session. "There's someone here to see you," he said when she approached. "Says he saw the parade and has a proposition. I've got him waiting in the office." Sarah raised an eyebrow, curious but cautious. "Did he give a name?" "Robert Caldwell. Says he's with the state's Veteran Affairs Department." Intrigued, Sarah asked one of her volunteers to take over the session and followed Mike to the small office. Inside, a man in his 60s stood examining the photos on the wall, images of therapy clients, volunteers, and of course, Valor. "Mr. Caldwell, I'm Sarah Mitchell." She extended her hand, taking in his pressed khakis and polo shirt embroidered with the State Veteran Affairs logo. "Colonel Mitchell, thank you for seeing me without an appointment." His handshake was firm, his demeanor professional but warm. "I'll get right to the point. I'm heading up a new state initiative focused on expanding mental health services for rural veterans, and your program has captured our attention." Sarah gestured for him to sit, curious where this was heading. "I'm glad to hear the state is focusing on rural needs. How can Healing Hooves help?" Caldwell leaned forward, his enthusiasm evident. "We're looking to establish a network of specialized service providers across the state. places where veterans can access evidence-based therapies without traveling hours to a VA facility. Your therapeutic riding program would be an ideal addition to that network. He outlined a proposal similar to the VA partnership Mercer had discussed, but with a state-level focus and the potential for grant funding to expand services. The state was particularly interested in programs that offered alternatives to traditional talk therapy, recognizing that many veterans, especially those from combat arms specialties, responded better to active, experiential approaches. "We'd like to feature Healing Hooves as a model program in our promotional materials," Caldwell continued. "With your permission, of course. That video of you and Valor has already done more to raise awareness about equine therapy than a dozen brochures could accomplish." By the time Caldwell departed, leaving behind a folder of information about the state initiative, Sarah felt as if she had stepped into an alternate reality. A week ago, she had been a private person running a small therapeutic riding program known only to her clients and the immediate community. Now, through a cascade of unexpected events triggered by her parade appearance, she and Healing Hooves were becoming visible on a scale she had never anticipated. That evening, as she completed barn chores, Sarah found herself in Valor's stall, her forehead resting against his solid shoulder as she processed the day's developments. "It's all happening so fast," she murmured. "VA partnerships, state initiatives, invitations to Fort Riley. I'm not sure I'm ready for this level of visibility." Valor shifted slightly, turning his head to regard her with those wise, patient eyes. In that silent exchange, Sarah felt a familiar calm settle over her, the same steady presence that had helped her navigate the parade route, that had carried her through therapy sessions when her own strength faltered, that had shown her a path forward when all she could see was what had been lost. "You're right," she said, straightening her shoulders. "One step at a time. We've handled worse than a little public attention, haven't we?" As if in agreement, Valor nudged her gently with his nose, his breath warm against her cheek. Sarah smiled, patting his neck before stepping out of the stall and securing the door for the night. Whatever came next, partnerships, expansions, demonstrations at Fort Riley, the FOBI renaming ceremony, they would face it together, just as they had faced every challenge since finding each other. Not as a wounded veteran and a retired cavalry horse, but as two souls who had discovered that service could take many forms, and that healing was not a destination, but a continuing journey. With this thought providing anchor and direction, Sarah walked from the barn toward her cabin, where her laptop waited with the beginnings of her speech for the renaming ceremony. Tonight, she would find the words to honor Ramirez, to acknowledge the cost of service, and to affirm the possibility of renewal that she and Valor embodied. A message that seemed increasingly important to share in a world hungry for stories of authentic resilience and purpose. 6 months after the Memorial Day parade, Sarah stood at the paddock fence, watching as the first snow of winter dusted Valor's chestnut coat with delicate white flakes. The horse seemed unbothered by the cold, moving with his usual dignified grace across the pasture. Sarah smiled, drawing her jacket closer against the chill. So much had changed since that pivotal day in May when she and Valor had processed down Main Street, facing her hometown for the first time as the person she had become rather than the one they remembered. The ripple effects from that single event had transformed Healing Hooves in ways Sarah could never have anticipated. The VA partnership was now officially in place, with veterans from 3 surrounding counties receiving therapeutic riding services under the Community Care Program. The state initiative had come through as well, providing grant funding that had allowed Sarah to hire a second full-time instructor and expand their physical facilities with a covered arena for year-round operations. Most surprising of all had been the response to their demonstration at Fort Riley. What was intended as a one-time presentation to cavalry trainees had evolved into a regular consulting relationship, with Sarah traveling to the base quarterly to advise on the selection and training of horses for potential second careers in therapeutic programs. The Army, recognizing the value of planning for their equine partners' futures, had embraced the concept wholeheartedly. The FOB renaming ceremony in Afghanistan had been a profound experience, difficult emotionally, but ultimately healing. Standing on the ground where she had nearly lost her life, Honoring Ramirez's sacrifice while surrounded by former unit members and current service personnel, Sarah had felt a sense of completion. Her speech, focusing on continuity of service beyond uniform, had resonated deeply with those present and had subsequently been shared widely within military communities. "Thought I'd find you out here," Mike's voice interrupted her reflections. He approached the fence, 2 steaming mugs in his hands. "Coffee with a splash of that hazelnut creamer you pretend not to like." Sarah accepted the mug gratefully, warming her hands around its comforting heat. "Just checking on everyone before the storm picks up. The weather service is saying we could get up to 8 inches by morning." Mike nodded, glancing at the thickening clouds. "The volunteers got all the extra hay stacked in the barn, and the water tank heaters are installed. Should be fine for a couple of days even if the roads are bad." They stood in companionable silence, watching as Valor and the other therapy horses moved toward the shelter of the run-in shed. The farm had a different feel now, more established, more purposeful. The additional funding had allowed for improvements that had long been on Sarah's wish list: safer fencing, updated tack, a proper wheelchair ramp for the mounting block, educational materials for clients and families. "Hard to believe it all started with a parade you didn't even want to be in," Mike commented, seemingly following her train of thought. Sarah smiled into her coffee. "Not just the parade. It started with Valor, with finding each other when we both needed a new direction." She glanced at her brother. "And with you bullying me into accepting Diane's invitation." "I prefer to call it forceful encouragement," Mike replied with a grin. "And don't forget Jensen. He was pretty persistent too." The mention of Jensen brought another smile to Sarah's face. The Marine had completed his formal therapy program months ago but had stayed on as a volunteer, discovering an aptitude for working with other veterans that had led to his current role as a peer mentor in the program. His wheelchair was now a familiar sight around the farm, as much a part of the landscape as the barn or the arena. "Speaking of Jensen," Mike continued, "he mentioned the documentary crew is confirmed for next month. You ready for your close-up, Hollywood?" Sarah groaned good-naturedly. The PBS documentary about innovative veteran services had been Jensen's idea. He had reached out to the producers after seeing their previous work on adaptive sports programs. Initially hesitant about more public exposure, Sarah had eventually agreed when she understood their focus would be on the therapeutic methodology rather than on her personal story. "As long as they remember this is about the program, not about me," she said, a familiar refrain that made Mike chuckle. "Keep telling yourself that, sis. But you and Valor are the heart of this place, whether you like being in the spotlight or not." Before Sarah could respond, the sound of tires on gravel announced an arrival. They turned to see a familiar sedan pulling into the parking area, Eliza Santos from the Tribune, now a regular visitor as she worked on her ongoing series about rural healthcare innovations. "Right on time," Sarah noted, checking her watch. "We're meeting to discuss the winter therapy schedule and the new veteran outreach program." Mike raised an eyebrow. "On a Sunday afternoon? When it's about to snow?" Sarah shrugged, avoiding his knowing look. "She's thorough. Wants to understand every aspect of the operation." "Uh-huh." Mike's tone was teasing. "And the fact that you two have been having these meetings over dinner at Luigi's for the past 3 months is strictly professional, I suppose." A flush that had nothing to do with the cold crept up Sarah's neck. "It's complicated." "Usually is," Mike agreed, his expression softening. "But for what it's worth, I like her. And more importantly, I like how you are when she's around. More open, more present." Sarah couldn't deny the observation. Her friendship with Eliza had developed gradually after the initial article, built on mutual respect and shared values. The reporter's genuine interest in veteran issues, her thoughtful approach to complex stories, and her quiet understanding of Sarah's boundaries had created a foundation of trust that had evolved into something deeper over time. "We're taking it slow," Sarah said simply, both trying to figure out where it might go. Mike nodded, respecting her privacy. "Fair enough. I'll finish checking the generators while you two have your meeting." He made exaggerated air quotes around the word, earning a playful shove from his sister. As Mike headed toward the equipment shed, Sarah walked to greet Eliza, who was retrieving a laptop bag from her car. The reporter looked up with a warm smile that made Sarah's pulse quicken slightly. "Sorry I'm a few minutes late," Eliza said, glancing at the darkening sky. "Wanted to beat the snow, but it's already starting to stick on the highway." "No problem. We've got plenty of coffee and guest rooms if the roads get bad." Sarah led the way toward her office, now housed in the expanded administrative building rather than her personal cabin. "I've been reviewing the draft of the veteran outreach materials you sent. They look good. Clear, informative, not too clinical." They spent the next hour discussing the outreach program, designed to connect veterans in isolated rural areas with services they might not know were available. Healing Hooves was serving as a hub for this coordinated effort, partnering with mental health providers, job training programs, and other support services to create a more comprehensive network of care. As they worked, the snow fell more heavily outside, transforming the farm into a winter wonderland. The therapy horses had all moved into the barn for the night, warm in their stalls with extra hay to keep them comfortable through the storm. Occasional gusts of wind rattled the windows, but the office remained cozy, heated by an efficient wood stove that cast flickering shadows on the walls. "I think that covers everything for the article," Eliza said eventually, closing her laptop. "But I'd like to get some more background on how this all connects to the military's mounted units historically. Maybe over dinner." The slight lift in her voice at the end of the question hinted at meanings beyond professional interest. Sarah smiled, recognizing and appreciating the careful dance they had been engaged in these past months. Professional collaboration gradually opening space for personal connection. "Luigi's is probably closed with this weather, but I make a decent pasta. If you don't mind staying in, that is." "I'd like that," Eliza replied, her expression warm. They moved to Sarah's cabin, where Mike had already stoked the fire before discreetly making himself scarce, presumably to his own place on the other side of the property. Sarah busied herself in the kitchen while Eliza explored the living room, examining the photos and mementos that Sarah had once kept hidden, but now displayed openly. A visual timeline of her military service, her recovery, and the building of Healing Hooves. "Is this your father?" Eliza asked, pointing to a framed photo of a man in Vietnam-era uniform. Sarah nodded, stirring the sauce simmering on the stove. "That's him. Captain John Mitchell, 101st Airborne. The flag we carried in the parade was his." "You have his eyes," Eliza observed. "That same intensity." The conversation flowed easily over dinner, moving from professional matters to more personal territories. Eliza's upbringing in a military family that had moved frequently. Sarah's adjustment to civilian life after years of structured military existence. Their shared love of literature and history. Outside, the snow continued to fall, creating a sense of peaceful isolation, as if the cabin were a world unto itself. Later, as they sat before the fire with glasses of wine, Eliza asked the question that had clearly been on her mind. "Are you happy, Sarah, with how everything has unfolded since the parade?" Sarah considered this, watching the flames dance in the hearth. 6 months ago, she might have struggled to answer such a direct inquiry about her emotional state. Now, after so many barriers had fallen, she found honesty came more easily. "I'm content," she said carefully. "Which is more than I expected to be again after the injury. The farm is thriving. The veterans we work with are making progress. Valor is healthy and seems fulfilled by his work." She paused, weighing her next words. "And I've reconnected with parts of myself I thought were lost for good. My sense of purpose, my ability to lead, my willingness to be seen." Eliza nodded, her reporter's instinct sensing there was more. "But?" Sarah smiled slightly, appreciating her perceptiveness. "But happiness still feels like a work in progress. Some days it's closer than others." "And today?" Eliza's question was soft, her eyes holding Sarah's with genuine interest rather than journalistic inquiry. "Today is a good day," Sarah answered truthfully. "Today I'm closer to happy than I've been in a very long time." The admission hung in the air between them, simple yet profound. Eliza reached across the space separating their chairs, her hand finding Sarah's in a gesture that spoke of understanding and possibility. They were interrupted by Sarah's phone buzzing with an incoming text. She checked it reluctantly, then smiled. "It's Jensen. Apparently Valor is refusing to settle in his stall until I come say goodnight. He's been doing this more often lately. The farm manager thinks he's getting spoiled in his old age. Or perhaps he's just making sure you're okay," Eliza suggested. "From what I've observed, that horse is remarkably attuned to you." Sarah nodded, thinking of the many times Valor had seemed to sense her emotional state before she herself was fully aware of it. "He's special that way. Would you mind if we bundle up and make a quick trip to the barn? It won't take long." "I'd love to," Eliza replied, setting down her wine glass. "I've been wanting to see more of how you interact with him when it's not for a story." They donned coats, boots, and gloves, then ventured out into the snowy night. The path to the barn was already covered with several inches of pristine white, their footprints marking the first tracks in the new fallen snow. The world had that muffled quality that comes with heavy snowfall, a hush that made their voices seem louder than normal as they crossed the yard. The barn was warm and fragrant with the comforting smells of hay, horses, and leather. Most of the therapy horses were already dozing, but Valor stood alert in his stall, ears pricked forward as if he had been waiting for Sarah's arrival. He nickered softly as they approached, reaching his head over the stall door to greet them. "See what I mean? Spoiled," Sarah said, but her tone was affectionate as she stroked his forehead. "Everything's fine, boy. Just checking on you before the storm gets worse." Eliza watched their interaction with evident fascination. "The bond you have with him is remarkable. It's like watching two old friends who don't need words to communicate." "That's exactly what it is," Sarah agreed, offering Valor an apple slice from her pocket. "We've been through a lot together. Learned to trust each other when trust wasn't coming easily to either of us." As they stood there in the quiet barn, surrounded by the peaceful sounds of horses settling for the night, Sarah felt a sense of rightness that went beyond contentment, approaching something that might indeed be called happiness. Her life had taken turns she could never have predicted, some devastating, others unexpectedly fulfilling. But standing here with Valor's solid presence and Eliza's companionship, she felt anchored in a present that honored her past without being confined by it. "He really was the star of the parade, wasn't he?" Eliza said, watching as Valor accepted another apple slice with gentle lips. "That passage he did. It was like he knew exactly what the moment called for." Sarah smiled, remembering how Valor's spontaneous display had shifted the energy of the crowd, turning skepticism into admiration. "He's always had perfect timing, knows when to show off and when to be steady. It's what made him such an effective cavalry horse, and what makes him invaluable in therapy work now." "Like when he stopped for that child who ran into the street," Eliza recalled. "No panic, no drama, just calm, immediate response to prevent harm." "That's Valor," Sarah agreed, patting his neck. "Responding to what's needed rather than reacting to what's feared. Took me a lot longer to learn that lesson than it took him." After ensuring Valor was comfortable for the night, they made their way back through the deepening snow to the cabin. The temperature had dropped further, and the wind had picked up, making the warm interior even more welcoming upon their return. "You'll have to stay tonight," Sarah said, helping Eliza remove her snow-covered coat. "The roads will be impassable until the plows come through tomorrow." If Eliza had any concerns about this development, she didn't voice them. Instead, she smiled, her cheeks flushed from the cold. "I packed an overnight bag just in case. Reporter's preparation." They settled back before the fire, the conversation turning to future plans, the documentary filming, the expansion of the veteran outreach program, the possibility of Healing Hooves serving as a model for similar initiatives in other rural areas. As they talked, Sarah realized how much her perspective had shifted since the parade. What had begun as a personal journey of reconciliation had evolved into something larger, something that reached beyond her individual healing to touch the lives of others seeking their own paths forward. "You know," Eliza said thoughtfully, When I first approached you about the interview before the parade, I thought I was pursuing a fairly straightforward story about a female veteran breaking barriers. I had no idea it would lead to this ongoing series or to—" She gestured between them, leaving the nature of their evolving relationship gracefully unnamed but acknowledged. "I had no idea what I was getting into either," Sarah admitted with a small laugh. "I just wanted to get through the parade without embarrassing myself or Valor. And instead you inspired an entire community and launched a new chapter for Healing Hooves." Eliza's voice held admiration and something warmer, more personal. Not bad for someone who initially declined to be interviewed. Sarah smiled, feeling a sense of peace settle around her like a comfortable blanket. "I'm learning that sometimes the things we resist most are exactly what we need. Visibility when we crave anonymity, connection when we think we want solitude. And a pushy reporter when you thought you wanted privacy?" Eliza suggested with a teasing smile. "Especially that," Sarah agreed, reaching for Eliza's hand and finding it waiting for hers. Outside, the snow continued to fall, transforming the landscape into something new and beautiful. Inside, beside the warmth of the fire, Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell, Silver Star recipient, amputee, therapeutic riding instructor, and reluctant parade participant, embraced the unexpected gifts that had come from that single day of visibility. Professional opportunities, community recognition, renewed purpose, and most surprisingly, the possibility of personal happiness with someone who saw her completely and valued all that she had become. In the barn, Valor slept peacefully in his stall, perhaps dreaming of parades and demonstrations, of carrying wounded warriors toward healing, of the long journey that had brought him from military service to this farm, where his strength and steadiness continued to transform lives. Like his rider, he had found a second chapter that honored his first, a continuation rather than a conclusion, a new form of service that drew on all that had come before. As the winter storm wrapped Healing Hooves in its white embrace, the farm stood as testament to the power of unexpected journeys and second chances, a place where past and present coexisted in harmony, where wounds became wisdom, and where a parade that nobody believed in became the catalyst for transformations no one could have predicted. For Sarah and Valor, it had been a winding path from battlefield to hometown parade route to this moment of quiet fulfillment. The journey had not ended. Indeed, new directions were just beginning to reveal themselves, but they would face whatever came next together, with the same courage and dignity that had carried them through all that had come before. And if there were more parades in their future, more moments of being seen and celebrated, they would approach them not with reluctance but with the quiet confidence of those who have learned that visibility, offered on one's own terms, can be not a burden but a gift, to oneself and to others still finding their way home.